Good morning, and can I welcome members and the public to the 28th meeting in 2013 of the Health and Sport Committee. As usual, can I remind all of those present to switch off all mobile phones, Blackberries and other wireless devices that may interfere with our sound system. Members of the public may also have noticed that some members and officials are using iPads and other tablet devices. This is instead of the hard copies of their papers. We have, again, apologies for Richard Simpson and welcome Malcolm Chisholm with us as the Labour Party substitute. The first item on the agenda today is subordinate legislation. We have one affirmative instrument to consider, the Glasgow Commonwealth Games Trading and Advertising Scotland Regulations 2013 in draft. As usual, we're going to take evidence from the Minister before we move to formal debate. And can I welcome the Minister and their officials, Shona Robertson, Minister for Commonwealth Games and Sport, Jane McPherson, Policy Executive, and Stuart Fobister, Divisional Solicitor of the Scottish Government. Welcome to you all. I invite the Minister to make her opening statement. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thanks, Convener. Thanks for inviting me to speak about these draft regulations that I've laid for Parliament's approval. Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games will be the largest multi-sport event Scotland has ever hosted, providing a fantastic opportunity to showcase Scotland internationally. The Government is required by the Commonwealth Games Federation host city contract to introduce legislation necessary to prohibit ambush marketing and eliminate unauthorised street trading in the vicinity of Games locations. I'm committed to meeting these terms and in doing so want to create a backdrop that will be fit to present Scotland's celebration of the Games to the world. This not only includes fields of play but also within the extended Games locations where it's important to create a celebratory look and feel. These regulations will ensure safe and secure routes, allowing the free flow of spectators, while also safeguarding sponsors' brand association rights. Very grateful for the help of the Glasgow 2014 Organising Committee, Police Scotland and the host local authorities who have helped shape the draft regulations and inform the development of the event zones and the necessary periods of restrictions. By regulating advertising, the Government is ensuring that the revenue generated through sponsorship is protected. It's important that companies sponsoring the Games who have paid for their association rights retain the exclusive right to associate their brands with the Games. Street traders wishing to trade in the vicinity of Games locations will also need to be authorised unless one of the exemptions applies. Controlling outdoor trading will be key in ensuring the safety and free flow of spectators and traffic to and from Games venues. Experienced local authority officers will carry out the enforcement. A light touch approach will be taken to minor infringements. However, persistent and more serious offences could be reported for prosecution through the criminal courts. When creating the regulations, we've sought to be proportionate and to create conditions whereby existing businesses are subject to minimum disruption, whilst ensuring that the requirements of the host city contract are met. The consultation response has highlighted that it's important businesses are well informed on what they can and cannot do. Communication will therefore be assured through a number of activities being undertaken. This includes the publication of a plain English guide of the regulations, which will translate them into an easy-to-follow format. This is in addition to leaflet drops sent to traders currently licensed to trade within the Games locations. So, Convener, I recommend that the committee supports this instrument and commends it to Parliament that they should vote to approve it.
Thank the Minister for that statement. Do we have any questions from members? Rhoda Grant.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification as much as anything else? There will obviously be street traders operating in that area at the moment, selling food or whatever. How will they be affected by this? Do they need to pay for a new licence or will their existing rights be preserved?
Do you want to answer to that? Sure.
They will need to pay for a new licence.
So, just as a follow-on to that, will they then receive compensation? I mean, if they're going to have to apply for a new licence that means that they are being, I suppose, prohibited from their normal ability to go about their business. And what if they're not able to purchase that new licence? Will they be compensated in some way for the removal of their business during the period of the games?
No, they wouldn't be compensated.
The fee is 70
The fee
pounds.
is not to exceed £70, so there would be some
And
discretion
that's
to the
obviously
organising
to
committee.
cover the costs of administrating this system.
But if they, but if they weren't guaranteed a licence, then you could be removing their livelihood for the period of the game, which could have a devastating impact. And you know, I don't have examples to give you, but you know, newspaper vendors and the like maybe not make £70 over the period, you know, or that could be a huge part of their profits. And the like.
Yeah, newspapers are exempt. So there are a list of exempted categories. Newspapers are exempt, and obviously, if someone has a fixed business like a cafe, and you know they have outside tables, for example, as they at the moment as a trading concern, then they won't be affected. But if they're, you know, so there are certainly certain exemptions, of which, for example, newspapers are one, because they wouldn't, you know, it's a product that wouldn't obviously, or wouldn't be able to be associated with the games. It's a newspaper, whereas periodicals are treated slightly differently. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So a big issue would be treated differently.
Well, charities are exempt.
Okay.
So charities will not have to pay the fee. So they're not exempt, but they wouldn't have to pay the fee. Is that correct? Yeah. So although they would have to, so if you, the big issue, for example, would have to apply for authorisation because they're selling something, but they wouldn't have to pay the £70 fee.
Okay. And just one final point.
Yeah.
Have the existing traders in the area been consulted about this?
Yes.
Have they been made aware? And
Yes, they
they've been consulted?
have. Yes, they have. And, you know, the consultation responses were, you know, fairly positive. Obviously, questions have been asked. There's been quite a high level of engagement, meetings held, to really try and make sure that everybody understands, you know, what's required, but also to make sure that that's in a plain English format once the regulations are communicated. But yeah, there has been quite a lot of consultation, including meetings being held with local traders.
And are they reasonably relaxed about this?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of there's no respondents questioned the need for regulations. Responses were broadly positive. I think there was questions about the technical detail, you know, about how it might affect them. But you know, those events people were able to have their questions answered.
Okay, thank you.
Bob Doris and then Nanette Millen.
Convener, I suppose just a brief follow on. I mean, this committee did look at the Commonwealth Games Bill, and ambush marketing is clearly can undermine sponsorship and partnership deals with the Commonwealth Games, which is vital to the overall financial underpinning of the Games business plan. But just for clarity, I suppose, if someone is a regular trader in that part of Glasgow, we're not talking about revoking their licence full stop. Are we talking about a temporary suspension of their licence for the lifetime of the Games? And if so, could you tell us for how long that temporary suspension would apply for? And of course, they could then pay the £70 fee to trade through the Games with increased footfall, dramatic increased footfall within the area.
Yeah, the period of the prohibited times is laid out in Schedule 2, and they're different for each venue. I mean, for example, if I can give you Hampden, the Hampden precinct, Hampden Park precinct would be from the 23rd of July to the 3rd of August, so it's absolutely Games time. Ibrox is the 25th to 27th of July, because that's the time that's being used as a venue. So it's not every venue would be prohibited for the whole duration of the Games if it's only being used for part of the 11 days, if you see what I mean.
And if you're a regular street trader, once that time lapses, you would just continue with your business.
Absolutely, you're back to normal trading.
As normal.
Yeah.
Convener, thank you. I just wanted to kind of hopefully tease out a context to it, because I would imagine those who are selling goods during that time, we'll see a significant increase in the footfall and visitors to the area. So there's a huge opportunity for retailers within the local area, I would think, but I've got no further questions.
And of course, it doesn't affect those who are permanent, you know, have permanent locations within, so those that are kind of within shops and fixed, I don't know how to say fixed venues, I suppose.
Within buildings.
Within buildings, yes. Within buildings, it doesn't affect them. Obviously, there are restrictions on advertising of those businesses, but not their trading.
Thank you.
Lynette?
Just out of interest, did you look at what happened in the Olympic Games? And
Yeah.
were there any comparisons to be drawn from that, and have to sort of followed suit there? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar set of arrangements. I mean, there were, and actually, if you look at the ambush marketing, I think there was about, I'm just trying to find the figure here, I think there was something like 894 cases where that essentially warnings were given. And in the main, it was people who were unaware that they were infringing, they were breaking the rules. So it wasn't people who were intent on going; it was people who kind of misunderstood. But there were 894 cases, so it does show that there is an issue there that has to be addressed. So we've learned quite a few lessons from the Olympics in that regard, and structured these regulations in accordance with lessons learned from there.
Just as a matter, I don't want to prolong it too much, but it would be interesting to know how we consulted with the street traders. My impression is that they are, not in any organised groups or whatever. I mean, it may be a totally wrong impression. And how many licences do we expect to be giving out based on other experiences, Manchester or indeed London? And when will those licences be available for those who would wish to participate in street trading through that opportunity?
I mean, I'll hand over to Jane in a second. There was an informal consultation meeting held back in January with traders, and they were contacted through various communication. Most traders have a point of communication. So
How many turned up?
Do you want to add some detail?
Yeah, it was a very good point, actually. It's very difficult to engage with this group. We sent out to quite a number of different traders to try and get them to come and talk to us about the regulations. We had one trader turn up to the meeting. So not hugely representative, but I think that the trader actually was fairly relaxed in terms of the regulations, just wanted to make sure that the guidance would be clear about what they were allowed to do and what they weren't allowed to do. But obviously, yes, one trader. We tried very much through the formal consultation as well to make sure that we included some trading organisations within that, so that we could try and reach people to get them to have a look at the content of the regulations. It's been quite difficult, but I think the organising committee in particular will be doing quite a lot of work to try and engage with traders on the ground to make sure that they know about the regulations. And that'll involve going along to things like football matches or to sporting events at the venues that are going to be in use during the Commonwealth Games, to make sure that people are aware of the regulations and they know the authorisation process that they need to go through. In terms of how many licences, the organising committee are very clear that they want to try and minimise the effect on particularly habitual traders. So where possible, they'll issue as many licences as they can, or authorisations as they can, to make sure that that business is not unduly affected. But obviously there will be some limitations, particularly from a safety point of view, just making sure that there's limits placed on to make sure that there's the kind of flow of spectators that's allowed as they go up to the different venues. So it'll be for the organising committee to determine how many licences. They've not done that yet, so I can't give you a figure. But they will try and minimise the impact on traders through that. And once the regulations hopefully go through Parliament, then the organising committee will start that authorisation process straight away. It'll be open for a few months for the traders to be able to apply for authorisation, and I think at the beginning of next year, spring next year, they'll know whether or not they've been successful, and then there'll be details given about how they can then go ahead and trade.
Are there any other questions from committee members? No. If not, then we move to agenda item number 2, which is the formal debate on the Glasgow Commonwealth Games Trading, Advertising Scotland Regulations 2013, on which we have just taken evidence. Can I invite the Minister to move motion S4M 07761?
I move that this committee accepts the motion to approve the Glasgow Commonwealth Games Trading and Advertising Scotland Regulations 2013.
Thank you. Do any members wish to participate in the debate? Yes, Bob Doris.
I don't want to unduly extend a debate that may not be necessary, but just given the fact that one trader turned up at that meeting, I mean, that doesn't surprise me in terms of how difficult it is to reach that group. But my understanding would be the local authority would be in a position where they're granting licences and reviewing and monitoring licences across each local authority area under normal circumstances. So during the debate, it's an opportunity for me to perhaps put on the record that I'm keen to know what the relationship is between the local authority and the organising committee itself, because the local authority has a direct responsibility to make sure they're in regular contact with street traders right across Glasgow and other local authorities, you know, to make sure that those who are plying their trade there are fully licensed and are complying to regulations. So there should already be a direct connection there between the local authority and street vendors. So hopefully going forward, the local authority will take on, as a partner to the games anyway, the local authority will take on a role in working effectively with street traders, because that would seem to be the obvious vehicle, because the local authority should be doing it already, irrespective of whether there's a Commonwealth Games or not.
Does any other member wish to participate in the debate before I ask the Minister to sum up? No? Minister.
I think that's a fair point. The local authorities are key here, not least that they are going to be the enforcement officers, so their local knowledge is going to be very important there. But I think what we'll do is we'll certainly feed that back, that particularly when it comes to communicating the requirements and making sure that street traders understand that clearly the local authority role within that, making sure traders are communicated with well, is going to be important, so we'll certainly feed that back.
Thank the Minister for that. And I now put the question on S4M 07761. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Minister and officials. Suspend briefly now until we make arrangements to get our first panel. Thank you. Yeah. We now move to agenda item number 3, which is our last day of Evans taking on the public bodies joint working Scotland bill. First this morning we have a round table which we can perhaps loosely call regulatory, scrutiny and complaints bodies. And as I usually do with a round table, I'll introduce myself, then we'll go round, although I've got to say there's many well-kent faces around the table, and many of you have been here before, but for the record, I think it's useful. My name's Duncan McNeill. Of course, the convener of the Health and Sport Committee and MSP for Greenock and Inverclyde.
Thanks, Duncan. Bob Doris, MSP for Glasgow and Deputy Convener of the Committee.
Claire Sweeney, Audit Scotland.
Annette Britton from the Care Inspectorate.
Richard Lyle, Central Region MSP.
I'm Paul Eady from the Care Inspectorate.
Gil Patterson, MSP for Clydebank Mulgai.
Denise Coyer, Chair, Healthcare Improvement Scotland.
Rhoda Grant, Highlands and Islands MSP.
Jim Martin, Public Services Ombudsman.
Aileen McLeod, MSP for the South of Scotland.
Robbie Pearson, Director of Scrutiny and Assurance at Healthcare Improvement Scotland.
Annette Milne, MSP for North East Scotland.
Maureen Faulkner from the Information Commissioner's Office.
Mark MacDonald, MSP for Aberdeen Donside.
Paul McFadden, also from Public Services Ombudsman.
Northern and Leith.
Thank you, all of our guests this morning for that. We'll move to Richard Lyle, who will give it, for the first question, open up the discussion. As always with the panels and the people who are here, we will continue to give you preference and above the politicians that are around the table. We want to listen and hear what you're saying today. Makes a change for politicians, but there you go. We'll see if we can keep to that. Richard.
Thank you, Convener, and can I welcome all the members of the panel this morning. The committee has heard, I turn to the subject of public involvement. The committee has heard extensive evidence about the involvement of key stakeholders such as the third sector and different professional groups. However, the committee has also heard, hasn't heard more about public involvement. Last week, witnesses stressed the importance of including the public, patients and carers. Could the panel tell me how they think the bill should involve the public and whether the bill is in fact clear about the involvement of the public?
Perhaps just from the Information Commissioner's perspective say that one of the issues that we have with the bill was very much in relation to the models that were being used and thinking specifically about how the public will exercise their rights under the Data Protection Act should they wish either to make a subject access request or if they have an issue with regard to the information that's recorded about them. So from our perspective, thinking about public involvement, we found that in terms of the two models, we very much would want to go for the body corporate type as opposed to the delegated type of model because we see the latter as being quite confusing for the public to be involved or to engage with the organisations concerned in terms of the delivery of services.
Is there anyone else? Annette?
Thank you very much, Convener. From our perspective, from a regulatory point of view, we believe that hearing the public voice as part of the evidence for inspection is really important, and it occurs to me that there are a couple of parts of the bill which might help to increase the current public participation in that inspection process. One of those is the principle of person-centredness in the heart of the bill, and as part of our inspections we involve lay people in our inspections, and we also take over 3,000 complaints a year from members of the public specifically about services which we investigate, so that gives the public a voice already. And protecting people's human rights is also a key fundamental part of the bill, and we would see that as a way that the public could come forward with complaints to us, or as part of the work that they do as part of inspections to ensure that those rights are being met. So we think there is some potential for us to increase the amount of public participation in our current inspection regimes.
Just to build on that, I think Audit Scotland have long advocated the user and carers being at the heart of the way that services are delivered, and what's coming through quite strongly is the important role that local professionals have, GPs, social work staff, in helping to shape how those services develop over time. I think it's less clear how the public will be involved, and keen to hear more as the bill develops about how that voice will be heard, because it is very important that it's at the heart.
I would just echo from Healthcare Improvement Scotland's perspective, the Scottish Health Council, which is part of our organisation, is responsible for delivering the Scottish Government's national person-centred care collaboration and programme, and that will extend out through community services. So we also as an organisation have a duty of user focus as part of a statutory duty already. So we do feel that in addition to what the bill provides, we actually do have the framework already in place for that.
Robbie, yes please, and then Jim Martin, I think.
If I may, Convener, just to develop the point that's already been made, is about the role of the Scottish Health Council. We already have within the Scottish Health Council a participation standard which is mandatory for NHS boards, in which we assess NHS boards on and how they engage with public and users. In addition to that, for local authorities, there's a national community engagement framework or standard. And again, I think there's an opportunity there to align the two, the participation standard for the Health Council and the community engagement framework with local authorities. And I think that, again, would be an indicator of how we could join up and get to a common language about engagement with communities and individuals.
Jim Martin.
I think structures can be very easy for administrators to find their way around. The issue I have is that whichever structure in place must be easy for the ordinary person to access and find to get in, number one. And so when we look at the structures that have been put in place, I think that should be the first thing we should look at, not how is it going to be administered, but how accessible is it going to be. The second point is that when people are in that system, there must be a way which is easy for them to access, which is simple and standardised, for them to raise issues that emerge. And that's, I think, the difference between the questions about involvement, the difference between involvement and access. If people are genuinely going to be involved in their care and the health care that they receive, then they have to have means by which they can engage. That has to be simple, has to be standardised, and has to be effective.
Anyone else? Richard, do you?
Yeah, it was quite interesting, the answers. Can I also ask, as a follow-up, if you don't mind, does the bill comply, in your opinion, does the bill comply with the Christie version of services being designed with and for people and communities?
Will it make things better? Will it focus on people? Is it designed around the needs of service users? Is it accountable to those people? Yes,
Convener, we certainly believe, and I think we said in our submission that we believe that the principles of the bill seeks to do that. So we believe there is the potential for the bill to do that.
Does anybody want to be more enthusiastic about that? I mean, I do think that reflects. I didn't intend to be too sarcastic there, but I think it does reflect a lot of the evidence that we've heard, that there are many of us, including this committee, got an ambition to make this work. That, you know, that what we currently have could be better for service users and others. But between the bill and delivering it, there's much more work to do, I think. Robbie, did you want to come in?
Develop the point. I think in terms of how we engage not just with users but at locality level, and I think there's a real opportunity within the bill and the design of localities, locality planning. There is an opportunity for communities to be more closely engaged than the other two have been.
Is there anyone else? Paul? Blair?
Just very briefly, Chair. I mean, it's, as Annette said, the principles, I think, are absolutely right. I think one of the biggest obstacles to getting better outcomes for service users is this kind of entrenched organisationalism, and anything that we can do to break down the barriers, I think, is to be welcomed. And I think generally across the Scottish body politic there is a consensus around that. It's how you do that, I think, is where you as politicians perhaps have your disagreements on emphasis. But I think generally that is a direction of travel that's to be welcomed. What we're all about is trying to get better outcomes for frail and vulnerable people.
Yeah. How do we change that culture? Does anyone else? Claire?
That was the point I was going to make, is that clearly there have been lots of attempts to try and resolve some of the challenges of the lack of integration between health and social care services. So welcome the approach that is putting the user at the heart of those changes. That is something that's really important. And in theory, the bill is trying to get round some of those artificial divisions between the services that have existed, and a real appetite for that to be taken forward at a local level. And we're certainly starting to see signs that is happening. The development of partnership working in a much more serious way than we've ever seen in Scotland before.
Dr. Coyle.
I just sort of wanted to build on that, because I think one of the great opportunities of this bill is the commissioning powers it gives the health and care partnerships. And part of the commissioning powers are based on standards. And I think apart from having both health and social care standards, I think it's very important that we have standards and outcomes that actually are about what people really genuinely think about the service they're delivering. And to build on Robbie's point, I think it's about asking people in a locality, what do you actually think about these services? So I think when we're commissioning, if the standards that are set and the commissioners are adhering to them, and we have outcomes that are really quite person-centred outcomes, then I think we actually will be able to answer the question in the next couple of years.
Okay. Anyone else? Mark, do you want in on this?
I think it follows on, convener.
Yes,
it follows on from the issue around public interface, and I noticed Mr. Martin is in his remarks saying that there needs to be standardisation, and I think that probably leads us on to the issue around the complaints system. We heard evidence from NHS Dumfries and Galloway that they felt there wasn't really any urgency in terms of a standardised complaints procedure, but I note in the Ombudsman submission it states the areas of health and social care contain competing legislative complaints processes, and without legislative change there are barriers to these processes working together. So I wonder if, and probably Mr. Martin could answer first, but other panellists have a view on the urgency of standardisation of complaints, how they would envisage the complaints procedure working in a standardised way. Would there be, who would the complaints be directed to? Would there be a hierarchy within which you could then escalate a complaint as there is now in different ways? So really, what's the urgency, and what would the complaints procedure ideally look like?
And that's to you, Mr. Martin.
Sounds like
initially.
It sounds like it. If I can take a rise outside this room for a second, there's a parallel development happening where the government are looking at the social work complaints procedure to try to bring that more in line with what's happening in other parts of the public service. And I think that word is an important one, service. The question for me is, in this integration, are we creating a service, or are we finding a means by which we're delivering services? Now, in my view, the public look at this as a service, and therefore I think the case for standardisation is quite clear in the public mind. If we're doing this, it has to be about that. And on the complaint side at the moment, there are many different routes. If you take, for example, what I can look at the moment, I'm restricted in what I can look at in social work. But if the government reforms go through in the way that they look as if they're going to go through, I may have more powers to look at things in social work. But I have different powers to look at social work and health. In health, I can look at clinical decision making, but in social work, I cannot look at the professional judgment of social workers. Now, if we've got a holistic approach to delivering these services to the ordinary person, we make it extremely difficult for people to find their way through the system when things go wrong. I mean, I understand that the procedure that currently happens in NHS Highland, where things have been brought together, is that the opening portal for complaints is through the health system. Thereafter, people are signposted either to local authority complaints or to health complaints. And to make a mess of the English language, that is non-joined upness. If we're talking about getting the system to join up, then we have to make sure that it's as easy as possible for people, when things go wrong, to get holistic solutions to the holistic problem they're facing. Therefore, I think the standardisation is there. Now, I don't think the social work provisions will change at the same pace as this bill. I think they may lag by a year, maybe 2 years behind this. So I think when we're looking at it, if we're really being public and patient-centred, and looking at the client, looking at the customer, then we should look at it from their perspective in the way in. Do they see one service, or do they see a multiplicity of services, and what do we want them to see? And when things go wrong, can we arrange it so it's as simple as possible for them to get things fixed as quickly as possible?
See if there's another is there any other responses to that? No.
Thank you very much, Convener. I would absolutely agree with everything that Jim has just said. I would want, however, to make sure that we protected the level of complaints handling that the public currently enjoys. So, for example, when we inspect, when we carry out our complaints investigations, we do so on behalf of the complainant, and we try to work out with them what they're complaining about and how we can help them resolve that issue. We do look at, last year we looked at over 3,000 complaints, and the advantage for people of the complaint system as it stands in social care, notwithstanding all the things that Jim has said about we come up against barriers too because we can't go any further than the social care environment, the advantage for people when we carry out a complaint investigation for them is if it prompts an inspection, then we can go ahead and do so. So if someone comes to us to complain about the care that their mother is receiving in a care home, we can not only investigate that complaint, but actually, depending on the seriousness of that complaint, we can immediately go ahead and inspect that care home. So it's not just simply a case of having a coherent, joined-up complaint system that's systemically different from what we've got just now, but also where we can actually use those complaints to go and get immediate solutions to the problems that people are having.
But, I mean, I think you would need to concede, though, and someone's saying, no, the numbers around the table, you know, are a physical representation of you know, it's difficult for elected representatives in many cases to deal with a family and get them through it. So how much more difficult with the resources and the help that we can find and experience of casework? You know, we've got 2 inspection agencies. You know, the Health and Improvement Service. We've got Care Inspectorate. So you know, all of these people around about the table, and this is about seamless services, a journey that somebody will be in, irrespective of where they are. They would expect that care. It would seem obvious that we should have you know, a system that's got one entry and people are picked up and supported in that. But Mark, you were going to follow up.
Yeah, no. It was just around the scope in terms of standardisation, because obviously the bill is not going to cover all social care services and all health services. It's focusing very much on adult social care and adult health service at the moment, although there is obviously scope for expansion depending on the use of ministerial power. So how would you envisage the standardisation approach? Would you see it as an opportunity to standardise across the board in terms of complaints procedure, even though we maybe didn't have integration across the board? Or how do you see it working? Because to me, if you're going to have, you could end up in a very complicated picture if you have one part of the complaints process that is standardised, but the rest remain individual complaints procedures.
At that point, Convener, I would refer the committee back to the work that was done by Lon Crerar and then by Douglas Sinclair. And I mean, their work is, I mean, I've said this to this committee, I think, before. this is one of the most frustrating things I find about this Parliament is the pace that we go at between taking a decision for change and implementing change sometimes seems very, very long. And Lauren Craier was asked to start his work on standardisation and looking at scrutiny in 2007. We're now in 2013, and we've just begun to implement standardisation across local authorities, housing associations, and other bodies. I think that if we are serious about looking at this as an integration, then all aspects of integration should be looked at, and that should include complaints. And I think that is a matter of some urgency, because what I would not want to happen is for a system to be brought in place and then a lag on the complaint side so that people become frustrated within the system and then begin to lose confidence in the system because of that. So I would urge people to think very carefully. And it makes a very good point about the way in which we do complaints. And I think there is greater scope could be had for joint investigations between bodies around this table in some aspects. And also, I think, with people like his and others, to use the information that we have gained in our databases to help inform their inspections.
But the same channel, we share that frustration. It's 18 months since we made, I think, some decent recommendations as a committee about his and Care Inspection Agency working together, commissioning, all of the issues that we have said here. So we share that frustration about progress. But have we got around the table here the same scenario that we have on the ground? That everybody's for change and working together until it impacts on them, and the decisions that we need to take are pretty difficult with the internal organisations to break down those barriers. Does that cultural resistance that we perceive on the ground at the point of delivery, it's not just there, it reflects right up, does it not? We're not all guilty of that?
Say a word. I actually don't think we are culturally resistant. I think we've got a huge opportunity in this integration bill, and certainly for the Care Inspectorate and for Healthcare Improvement Scotland, we've begun the pilots. Our pilots have been very successful in terms of doing integrated scrutiny. I don't think we also have issues about feeding complaints, and already we have started as organisations, along with the Public Ombudsman, meeting regularly to look at the patterns of complaints across different areas. I think Annette made the point that when it's not an issue of reluctance to join complaint systems together, it's about how do we make sure we get absolutely the best service when somebody complains. So I think what Annette was saying was their process for dealing with complaints is actually to look at them properly and work out what's actually wrong. The same system is happening with the Public Ombudsman in terms of clinical care. You can do huge in-depth deep dives in the Public Ombudsman's office into what was really happening clinically. Our challenge is actually to join those together, and totally agree with you, we'd love to join them together, but I think when we do that, give us a chance to actually have some pilots to make sure we don't lose any of the specialist expertise while we're doing that. So I would say it's not a cultural issue.
Just to try and get the frustration that Jim Martin expressed and we've expressed as a committee is shared by the Cabinet Secretary. This is why we've got this legislation. It was referred to by Claire. We have attempted, Malcolm Chisholm's here today, in a previously attempted to encourage this change over a long period of time. This legislation is brought about by a frustration that we have not been able, across the board, to change that landscape and focus on people who are using the services. That's why we're here. So, has there anybody got a view on that, Claire?
Just to reflect that, through the local audit work, looking at how public resources are being spent across Scotland, I think the scale of the challenge is really clear to us. This is a huge cultural change for people at all levels, And I think what we would say around that is that the need for really strong, clear local leadership and a shared vision and clarity about how resources will be used, to what end, and most importantly, and I think the thing that has been missing in the past is just as you say, the impact on what difference is this actually making to people, and being very clear about what the intended change is supposed to be. And I think with those things, that will move things forward. But I think the scale of the challenge is significant. We've talked about complaints, but there are a raft of other issues around workforce. What skills do we actually need? Are the resources in the right places? Giving people time to think differently. So, for example, the GPs are very important, but do they really have time? Do they really have space to contribute to what is quite a challenging agenda and working in a very different way? And there are lots of issues in there to unpick.
Does anyone else want to respond to that? Does that mean agreement or not?
Yeah, certainly in agreement. I think a crucial element of this is ensuring that when we talk about health and social care integration, we are bringing the elements of that together, such as the GPs in the local communities as well. And I think an increasing engagement of GPs in this agenda will be a marker of success in the future, where it's perhaps not been as robust with the community health partnerships.
Rhoda.
We've spoken about complaints, and I note in Audit Scotland in their evidence had also talked about audit procedures, that it wasn't clear the different bodies making up the new corporate body would have different audit procedures in place. And we also heard previously that there are different statutory procedures in place for things like staff governance between health and local government. And I'm wondering how a new body gets over that, because we've heard in detail about complaints and how messy that is. Once you get into staff governance and audit and the like, how can you make sure that this body is, I suppose, workable? I think that is some of the concerns that are being brought forward to us.
Claire?
In terms of the submission from Audit Scotland, we certainly raised a broad set of technical and broader issues that we want to see addressed going forward. So there are a series of technical issues around what the body corporate model actually would work like in practice. So questions about would there need to be a set of accounts? Would there need to be auditors assigned to those new bodies? Technical details underpinning what that body corporate process might look like. I would say that Highland's up and running with the lead agency approach, so we already are tackling the issues in terms of challenges around the financial audit process for that model. So that's already there, and there's been quite a lot of useful learning from that approach, I think. But one of the bigger issues we flagged up in our responses is that these new organisations, these new bodies, will be responsible for a significant amount of resource across the local area. And the issues about the power balance in the local area, and also capacity in terms of providing that strong local leadership and the technical skills needed to support that arrangement going forward. I think those are some of the issues we would want to see addressed looking forward.
Dr. Coia.
I suppose I wanted to raise the issue of clinical governance actually as part of these in the new body corporates, because at present in Healthcare Improvement Scotland we assure clinical governance throughout the NHS, and I suppose in terms of the body corporate we think it's important that there are arrangements around both clinical and care governance in order to deliver, I think it's about the quality of services and also about the safety of those services in clinical terms. So I think that's the discussions that we're beginning to have now around clinical governance and how that is within the body corporates.
Anyone else? Everyone. Oh, Malcolm, go on. Thanks.
No, well, I thought Claire Sweeney, I think her contribution there in her paper reads two of the central issues of this, which is that the governance arrangements and the resources. I mean, I suppose the resources is just a straightforward question in a way of how they're going to be determined, and we may want to talk about that in more detail in a moment. But I suppose around the governance, I think it kind of raises wider issues, because I remember the first evidence session there were quite a lot of people were wondering within the body corporate model what the relationship was between the chief officer and the health boards and local authorities. And I think there's still a lack of clarity in that, and I think the Audit Scotland does say there is essential that there is more clarity about how the chief officer will report to the NHS board and the local authority, and various other comments. So I don't know whether people have a view on this or whether the bill needs to be tightened up in this regard, because to quite a lot of people it's not entirely clear what the relationship is. I think there is a shifting of power towards the chief officer, but how complete that is not clear. And I mean, another angle on this was from the Information Commissioner's Office, who said in the submission that Section 21 places responsibility and liability squarely on the person to whom functions are delegated, which is presumably the chief officer in the corporate body model, but then goes on to say that health boards and local authorities will be joint data controllers. So even within that issue of responsibility for information, it's not entirely clear to me whether it's the host bodies, as it were, the bodies from whom power is delegated, or whether it's the chief officer and the board to whom power is delegated. And of course, the last point around governance is exactly who's going to be involved in that board. We've had long discussions in the last two sessions about the involvement of public on the board. Again, Audit Scotland are saying the role of health and care professionals is unclear. So it does seem to me around this whole issue of governance, there's a lack of clarity, and I don't know whether people think that should just be left to local arrangements, but it does seem to me that there does need to be more clarity in that nationally, because some of that obviously has significant legal implications.
I think I'd just refer back to the submission we made, which set out some of those concerns we have about that lack of clarity and the need to be clearer going forward. But I would also say that from previous work that we've carried out around community health partnerships, for example, clear accountability and a very clear sharing of resources is a very, very powerful combination. The potential is there, but it's in terms of, in a practical sense, how will that be taken forward? That will be interesting to see as the bill develops.
Maureen.
The Information Commissioner's perspective, the issue for us is about who is the legal entity. So when it comes to pointing the finger of accountability, as it were, on behalf of data subjects, then the body corporate for us is easier in a way, because it's the legal entity. That's who we would pursue in terms of some kind of redress, or whether it was a breach of a nature that was too serious enough to impose a civil monetary penalty. The civil monetary penalty would come from the legal entity, which is the body corporate. It then becomes much more difficult, as you rightly say, in respect of joint data controllers. And part of the lead agency model is where would we point that finger of accountability in the event that there was a breach? And if the breach was significant enough to impose a civil monetary penalty, from whose budget would that then have to come? That's something that if you go down the joint data controller relationship, then you're going to have to tease out all of those details very, very carefully in any joint data controller agreement that you're going to have. So it's certainly for us, we see, that's why I said at the outset, the body corporate model for us is certainly the easier one from our perspective. I think also from the public's perspective, because in that way, people, when they're engaging with a service, point to that service as the person for whom or to whom that they will seek redress, from whom rather they'll seek redress. But if you're then saying, well, actually, we're giving you the service, but it's not really us, you'll have to go somewhere else because we're joint data controllers and that bit of the service is actually provided by this data controller, it just becomes very, very messy, very, very messy indeed for them.
Anyone else? Malcolm, do you wish to follow that up?
Okay, at the moment, thanks.
Okay. Yes, Rhoda.
Back, I mean, that's interesting, but I suppose one of the concerns is it seems to make this work, we have to set up almost a body that will be an entity in its own, and we then need to reproduce all the functions that the two, I suppose, parent bodies would have, and by way of audit, by the way of staff governance, by the way of clinical judgment, the whole thing. How much is this going to cost and remove from kind of the services we're trying to provide? And I think this is in a way, the bill is designed to provide better services to those on the ground. But if we spend so much of the existing budgets, you know, on setting up a new service, I mean, would this need to be funded by central government? Would this need to be a body in its own right? How does that work, and what's the costs attached?
An answer to that, I'm afraid. My perspective, coming, as I say, from the Data Protection Act and thinking about individuals exercising their rights under the Data Protection Act, what I'm advocating is not necessarily going to be the best thing in terms of cost for Scottish Government, I'm afraid. I couldn't answer that question.
I suppose it takes us to another question. I mean, you know, previous evidence about how the organisations here fit in with the Health Board, the local authority, or 3 local authorities, the corporate body, the Community Health Partnership, or the CCHP. How do you all fit into that potential? Is it a structure or structures? How does all of that fit in? With budgets going here and there, who's accountable as and indeed, additional ministerial powers to be used if we don't understand what the corporate structure is and what we should expect from it? How do we know when it's appropriate for the Minister to intervene and when he should intervene? Claire and then Dr. Coyle.
From the Audit Scotland perspective, clearly we'll take a very close interest in any area of public sector which is going through a time of significant change. Resources are involved. We'll be interested in how public money is being used, not least because the risks at that time are greater, they're significant. And I think for us there are 2 different issues for Audit Scotland. One is in terms of the technical arrangements around the finances, which we've already touched on and we referred to in our response. And really to understand what that will look like in practice, we really need to understand a little bit more about how those local arrangements will work in practice. It's very hard to say at this stage the issue about whether financial auditors need to be appointed or not. Again, back to the Highland model, we've already got arrangements in place there. I mentioned there's been lots of lessons learnt from going through that approach, lessons which are transferable to a body corporate arrangement in some instances as well. But we also have that broader interest in terms of how the inspectorate approach is working for that integrated system, and also in terms of more generally how good value from all of the public sector resources being achieved through that change. So it's something we are keeping a very close eye on, and we'll continue to do so as some of the technical issues become resolved. And we know that there's work underway to try and address some of those challenges at the moment.
Dr. Coyle.
I suppose from Healthcare Improvement Scotland's perspective, we were looking at it, if you start with the person, an older person who ends up in accident and emergency, and what they're interested in and what we're interested in quality assuring is the pathway that gets them from primary care through social care into an accident and emergency department. So I think the structures, I think we get too bound by the structures actually. I think we can set outcomes and standards at each stage of that journey that actually the person can reflect back whether they had a good experience or a bad experience. So in terms of our joint inspections, what we're doing at the moment is going out and looking at those pathways and saying, are those pathways working? Now that pathway will take you from primary care and district nursing through these body corporates, which I hope actually are going to have a great opportunity to provide intermediate care in the community, something that's a step up from just sort of having to use an accident and emergency department. So I think if we set the right standards, measure the right outcomes and ask people how that pathway experiences for them, I think for both ourselves and the Care Inspectorate, that's what we quality assure. We won't actually be quality assuring the structures that are in place there.
Anyone else? Annette.
Thank you very much. Just building on the point that Dr Coy has just made, the new inspections that we're developing actually will be able to be carried out irrespective of the structure, and in fact will follow outcomes for people. And we've been able to demonstrate over the last 7 or 8 years how we've been able to do that with child protection and children's services, where irrespective of what the structure inside a local authority or indeed the community planning partnership has been, we've been able to look at the outcomes and the impact on children and young people. And we've recently been able to, in our triennial report, reflect on where things have got better in that partnership working. So supporting Denise's point, if we go from the point of outcomes and work back, then probably inspection can be flexible enough to deal with the structures that are deemed to be necessary locally.
Anyone else? Bob? Doris?
It's almost as if we'd discussed how to provide a seamless link, because it was the inspection process that I'd been sitting patiently kind of waiting for. I think I should perhaps just briefly put on the record that I know sometimes the Care Inspectorate can move quickly, because it was this committee's Care for Older People inquiry where Nicola Sturgeon, as the then Cabinet Secretary, moved before our inquiry completed to improve the inspection regime for care for older people. So sometimes things can move quickly and effectively, and I think it's important to put that on the record. But I suppose it's I'm interested in care pathways, and I know there has been joint work taking place between the Care Inspectorate and Health Improvement Scotland. How close are we just to having the one inspection regime? Because we're talking about integration, so rather than having the Care Inspectorate or Health Improvement Scotland going out, can we not just get the relevant inspector? I'm not really that fussed what the organisation's called, quite frankly, but can we get one person going out with a joint assessment tool and just doing the inspection? So hopefully that's where we're going. So some comments on that would be useful, but I should really stick to the details of the bill. And I do notice that, and I'll just read from my notes here, the policy memorandum to the bill outlines that the Care Inspectorate and Health Improvement Scotland will be required to scrutinise strategic plans for quality and standards and to ensure the plan will effectively achieve the objectives of the integration plan and nationally agreed outcomes. So that's a kind of widening role, and I think a very important check and balance within the system for these strategic plans. I'd quite welcome some comments from either Health Improvement Scotland and the Care Inspectorate in terms of how ready as organisations they feel in doing that, and perhaps how close we are, rather than talk about two organisations doing that a single accountable officer for either or both of these inspection bodies just goes and does that job, but so that the integration is both sides. It's not just the service that's been integrated, but the inspection side of it also.
Responses?
I'm certain Robbie will want to come in on this as well. I suppose if we were solely looking at older people services, then what we would say is actually we're making really good progress. And as far as those who are being inspected, and more importantly, those who are actually receiving services are concerned, it won't really matter whose logo's on the front of the report. They'll get a single report that will pull together the expertise in Healthcare Improvement Scotland and the Care Inspectorate to comment on and provide assurance around the services, that care pathway. The landscape's a little bit more complicated than that, because actually if we're looking at children's services, Healthcare Improvement Scotland will be involved to some extent, so will Education Scotland. So we're facing in different directions for different stakeholder groups as well. So you know, we need to think about the landscape for protecting all vulnerable people, including housing, sport, criminal justice and so on. But I think that the work that we've done around children's services has demonstrated that actually those who are receiving inspections and those who are benefiting from them do see it as a single inspection methodology, and they don't distinguish between the different inspectors who are there. And Robin may want to comment on the progress that we're jointly making actually in terms of older people services at the moment. Convener.
If I may, Convener, certainly there is a real appetite and a real opportunity here to do something very imaginative in terms of the joining up of scrutiny, and I think it would be difficult for us to make demands through scrutiny about integration on the ground in terms of service delivery and not be demonstrating it through scrutiny ourselves. We've already undertaken 3 pilots in West Lothian, Inverclyde and Berthing-Kinross, and they've been an excellent opportunity to demonstrate that joined up working between ourselves and the Care Inspectorate. But it is about respecting our different skills and expertise that we bring. And there's certain specialist expertise that Healthcare Improvement Scotland we bring, and equally in terms of the Care Inspectorate and social work input, for instance. But notwithstanding that, we are, through these inspections, now looking at the journey of patients. So in one inspection, for instance, we looked at the case records for around 90 older people. And from that, we were able to identify areas for follow-up for around 20 of those. So there's a real opportunity there for us to show that we are looking at the pathways of care, we are looking at the things that precipitate admission and the things that prevent discharge, for instance, from our acute hospital settings. And I think the bigger opportunity for us is, as we take this forward, how does that then link to a broader assessment about the quality of NHS care within individual systems, and a more comprehensive assessment about quality and safety, and how does that then link to what we're doing with the Care Inspectorate?
Are those taken in the acute setting, residential, or the community? Are we planning for those pilots? What did they examine? Was it
those pilots are looking at very much community-based services,
right.
And we obviously have the separate inspection regime at the moment, looking at the acute hospital setting. But the issues that we identify within the acute hospital, the things that maybe that brought the person into the acute hospital through A&E, or the things that are preventing discharge, have resonance to our wider inspections with the Care Inspectorate.
When will that information be available for?
In terms of the joint inspections,
what you've done.
We'll be sharing the key messages from that in due course. And what we're not doing is publishing these 3 pilot reports. What we're doing is learning for how we apply that methodology going forward.
Dr. Coya.
I was just going to add to the point of remembering what both our organisations have to do in addition to the straightforward inspections. So when you're looking at care pathways, it is important in terms of things like asthma, that you actually have the right treatments, that you have the right facilities. It's the same for diabetes. So the evidence that comes for that comes from Healthcare Improvement Scotland, is actually the SIGN guidelines and a whole range of standards that we produce. In the same way, the Care Inspectorate has very specialist expertise in children's inspections linking across to education. So I think it's not about talking about structures, because I think it's a nonsense to talk about structures, but I think it's important that we actually don't lose some of the specialist expertise when we actually combine these inspections together. I totally agree with you. I think it's a nonsense for the public to have different people saying they're from different organisations doing different things. When we go out to inspect, it should be one group of people doing one thing. But I don't think we should lose, in terms of the standards and the outcomes, the very specialist expertise that we bring together when we join the circle amongst ourselves.
It might also be worth mentioning that there are processes whereby inspection agencies come together collectively for a local area to think about sharing the knowledge that we all have about particular services in a certain area, and think about the risks and what that means for inspections going forward. So there is a process post-CRERA that was established to try and draw some of those issues together in a place-based focus, I guess. So a slightly different cut of the same issue.
So go ahead,
just in terms of no one's given, I mean, I accept all that, yeah. I mean, I suppose that the important thing is the public has an identifiable individual who's responsible for the inspection, who they can go to and get the information, keeping the expertise behind the scenes, however that's most efficiently done, fine. But no one's given specific reference, I don't know if by omission it means you're supportive of it, specific reference to the viewing the strategic plan for integration and giving some kind of a quality assurance to that. So I'd be interested just to get something on the record a little bit about that, but also given the fact that it's not the Health and Social Care Integration Bill anymore, it's the Public Bodies Joint Working Bill, are there, depending on the scope and the range of how local authorities and health boards and other potential services other than care of older people, children's services, housing, in the years ahead, may be part of some partnership working, could there be in the future be any other agencies that should give some kind of quality assurance to that strategic plan? I know we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves slightly, but just in terms of, first of all, the importance of your input currently in signing off, but in the future, do you anticipate any other bodies perhaps having an overview of that?
Annette.
Thank you for the convener for the chance to come back in. That's a very important point, and we did miss that point out. Certainly we've been discussing between Healthcare Improvement Scotland and the Care Inspectorate what we could bring in terms of looking at strategic commissioning, and we think that a key part of that plan will be strategic commissioning, and obviously Audit Scotland will be interested in that from a governance point of view, but we believe that jointly we could bring quite a lot of assurance and indeed follow-up action if necessary at looking to see whether in fact the intelligence that's been used to strategically commissioned services is actually having the impact at the frontline services that we inspect. So in other words, looking to see whether the strategic commissioning plans look like the right plan for that area, but then testing that out by looking at the services that people receive and working back from that. So we believe collectively we've got a lot to offer on that aspect of the bill, but I could see that Audit Scotland would also want to have a view, and we work jointly with Audit Scotland on a number of strategic inspections, also where we might want to have a view about the leadership and governance of that, as well as the outcomes in terms of the quality of care that people are getting. It's a very important point, Convener.
Is there anything stopping you doing that now? I mean, I think has mentioned the question of sufficient powers and additional powers in the submission.
At the moment, there is nothing that's going to cut across us being able to do that. I think the work that we're already testing out with the Care Inspectorate demonstrates that. I think we would certainly see and encourage that there is perhaps a reference on the face of the bill through amendment to scrutiny, and that would be an area of encouragement to be brought forward. But what we should be doing is working within our existing relationships and not getting in the way of structures and pushing on with that, and I think that's what everybody would want us to do.
Okay. Is there any other responses to that? No? Any other questions? No? In terms of going back to this cultural thing again about what makes it happening, you know, I've just heard from Robbie that there's nothing really to stop us. It's not as if we've not got sufficient powers to be doing this. I suppose the obvious question is, why haven't we? Getting on with it. But in terms of the cultural change and change, what is going to drive that change? Is it going to be the legislation itself, the ministerial powers? Is it the shifting of the budgets? Or is it a more focused human rights agenda at the heart of this that can help change that culture? Is there any responses? Dr. Coyer, thank you.
I suppose I'll base it on my experience because I'm very old and I've been through this before and worked in integrated teams. And as you know, psychiatrists have long had integration in community mental health teams. For me, it actually boils down to leadership. It's about setting the right space, which I think once you've got that and the principles, it's about leadership because it's people and leadership that drive this. And I think the bill is giving us a very good framework in which to operate. We have sufficient powers within the bill, and it's about leadership at a local level.
People service users got sufficient powers in terms of enforceable rights to help change this culture and this focus that everyone believes should be person-centred.
I think that's absolutely part of our jobs within the Care Inspectorate and Healthcare Improvement Scotland to actually be working for the public, and I think we should be really held to account for how we have managed to involve the public, certainly within our quality assurance of services, and how we actually quality assure how these new community health and care partnerships are involving the public. We see that as very much part of our role to answer that question.
Annette?
Thank you, Convener. Our Involving People group met last week, and they were keen, if I got the opportunity to say to the committee, that I should say to you that one of the ways to hold people to account is to listen equally to the voices of service users as to those providing the services. And they believe that holding those people who run services to account for the outcomes is the way to get integration.
Anyone else? Malcolm?
I mean, I agree with what's been said about, cultural change rather than structural change is the thing, but I still think the resource issue is going to be key to this. So, obviously there's not really that much in the bill about that, and there's scope for great variation in terms of what money's put in and how it's put in. And again, Audit Scotland had concerns about the arrangements, I think, in terms of how budgets would be determined. So I wonder if people have got any views on that. I think most of the witnesses have been content with leaving that to local discretion, but there certainly were one or two witnesses who said there should be more central determination of budgets, because otherwise we are going to have enormous variation. And also that whole key issue that people have flagged up about how will the acute budgets be involved in this is just going to be left to the discretion of health boards. So I would be interested in any comments people have about the resource question.
No one?
We previously talked about it's very difficult to say about how the audit process would follow the money because it's not clear yet how the body corporate model will work in practice. And I think we've, in previous audit reports that we've presented to the Public Audit Committee, we've been clear that the sharing of resources is a very powerful thing, but there is a need to be clear about what's devolved, who's responsible for what, and where the focus will be. And I think we wouldn't want to really comment on how, to what extent that should be prescribed, but I think what we would say is that there is a need for real clarity about what's involved in that sharing of resource and how it will be accounted for. And I think what will be interesting is following that through the strategic commissioning arrangements and looking at how what impact that shift is making over time, because that is challenging, that's very difficult to do. We're currently looking at services for older people, and we can see just the scale of the challenge there in terms of how resources across both systems are being used. It's very difficult.
Any other? I've got Rhoda first, I've got a wee list. On that one, yes, certainly.
Just on funding, convener, a question arose yesterday at a meeting I was at in regards to VAT. Does Audit Scotland have any views on how the VAT situation will be tackled between merging budgets, etc.?
I think, again, it's another issue we've raised in our submission that needs to be made clearer going forward, and the decision is about what type of body that body corporate is. There are different VAT arrangements for the NHS and for local government, so we just need to understand what type of body that would be, and then the VAT arrangement should be clear once that's established. And that goes for quite a number of different technical issues. There are different arrangements, for example, for the finances, for looking at the accounts for health and social care services, so that all would need to be much clearer, so we understood what arrangements and what legislation would apply in which instance.
Have Audit Scotland been involved in that process? I mean, I think the other issues that have been raised are pension implications, and indeed, I think we've got a note from the Finance Committee, one of these issues more for the Cabinet Secretary, but the equal pay risk, pension risk and VAT risk. Have the Audit Scotland done any work in that?
There's several pieces of several strands of work that touch on that, and lots of the local financial audit work deals with those issues. So in the audited accounts and the annual reports for the local bodies, those issues have been addressed. Also we produce overview reports for the NHS and local authorities each year, and again some of those issues are recurring pressures and risks that we've flagged up over a series of years, and involved in discussions in how some of those issues will be taken forward.
But in directly linking it to this legislation, though, has there been any correlation done? Or?
We are keeping a very close eye on how those discussions evolve, but we have flagged up the issue of the risks around the need to be clear about which type of corporate body that might be. Of course, there are implications for a whole raft of different issues that need to be resolved. Yes, through some of the submissions to the committee, certainly, in discussions with the Scottish Government.
I think, Nanette.
We've heard a lot this morning about the need for good local leadership, particularly. And I was lucky enough to be in Inverness last week and in West Lothian yesterday, where clearly in the different models there is good leadership there, great enthusiasm, and everyone seems to be working well together. What about areas where there at the moment isn't good leadership? I mean, we know that different organisations are at very much different stages of this journey towards integration. Is this legislation actually going to really help in those areas where currently there isn't the leadership or the will?
Any response? No takers in there. Rhoda?
Yes, can I think my question's more for Maureen Faulkner, regarding information sharing. We had evidence, I think it was from the BMA last week, about concerns about the single shared assessment only being shared in paper form, and if you're going to integrate services, you need to integrate information technology and how you share information. That's a big challenge, given you're talking about a body corporate, you're talking about two different organisations, you're talking about data protection, especially in a very sensitive area such as health and who can access records and the like. Have you had any thoughts about how that can happen?
With great difficulty, I think, and that is the case now. It's not just about, you know, whatever body ends up coming as a result of this legislation. Within the NHS, it's a problem because you have different systems, you have systems that can't speak to one another. Within the local authorities, it's exactly the same. You'll find a lot of local authorities might use the same systems, but some don't all use the same systems. Within education, it's exactly the same. They can't all talk to one another. I think until we have the kind of panacea of perhaps some central procurement that brings down a system from on high that can be put into the public sector across the board, and I don't think that'll ever happen, it's always going to be a problem of having organisations being able to talk to one another. Information sharing, I would say, from our perspective, we are probably contacted more and more often now about information sharing within the public sector. It's about getting it right. It's about setting it out in a protocol. It's very much about understanding exactly what we're sharing, why we're sharing it, with whom we're sharing the information. It's about accountability and responsibility once the information's there. Who's the data controller for it? There's lots and lots of questions, but these aren't new questions. There's good examples around the public sector of good information sharing protocols happening successfully and allowing, you know, good sharing to happen so that services are delivered properly and on time. Equally, there are some bad examples, and the difficulty I probably would say is that health, for understandable reasons, tend to be very protective about their information. Absolutely understandable, but it doesn't mean it can't be shared. It's just about how you go about doing that. The electronic paper isn't any better or worse than electronic processing. If you look at our website, you'll find that an awful lot of the breaches that occur about paper information going astray or something, you know, untoward happening to it, not so much the electronic versions, although we have obviously issues with electronic processing as well. It's really just about understanding what you want to do and then having a system that allows you to do what you want to do. Very often when you have new structures coming on stream, then you're going to look, well, let's get new systems. And I know there's a cost involved with that, but one of the issues that we have is that you go out and you listen to people who say, oh, we've got the very system for you. It's going to give you the all singing, all dancing buttons and bells. And sell that to you, and then once it's actually, you know, happening, once someone's actually trying to use it, it doesn't actually do what it was supposed to do. In that respect, we would absolutely say, and we mentioned this in our submission, that a privacy impact assessment is what should be happening to allow people to raise issues about privacy, to look at where there could be possible infringements upon privacy, and to look at how that might be mitigated in some way. And that, for us, is one of the disappointments, shall I say, that a privacy impact assessment wasn't done alongside this. This would be a perfect bill and policy development to use a privacy impact assessment to highlight all the different privacy concerns, including the information sharing, which is fundamental to this. Integration won't happen unless there is information sharing. And yet a privacy impact assessment hasn't been done. So our fervent hope would be that at some point a privacy impact assessment will be done that will look at issues about information sharing in particular, as well as some of the other issues about data controller and where responsibilities lie.
Anyone else? At this point, we've ranged over a number of issues as probably expected, but at this point, we said we would really listen. This is tokenism at the end, I suppose. But you know, is there anything that any of the panel members wish to leave with us today that hasn't been raised, that they feel that's a point they would want to stress? Then you have the opportunity now. Are we okay? And it's one of these things. Obviously, we as people interested in this process and affected by this process, we would welcome your ongoing observation and input as we go forward. But thank you all very much today for all the time you've given us and the written evidence as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. Suspend at this point while we set up for the Cabinet Secretary. There you go. We now move to agenda item number 5, which is 4, sorry, jumping ahead of myself, wishful thinking, Cabinet Secretary. We now move to agenda item number 4, which is consideration of another affirmative instrument in the National Health Service Cross-Border Healthcare Scotland Regulations 2013. As before, we're going to take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary and his officials before holding the formal debate. Can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary here with us today? Alec Neil, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing. John Brunton, European Cross-Border Healthcare Policy Manager. Welcome. And John Patterson, Divisional Solicitor, Scottish Government. Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to make some opening remarks?
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Convener. Until quite recently, a decade or so ago, there was little discussion of patient mobility at a European level. The UK and some other member states with similar health systems argued that EU treaty law only applied to insurance-based health systems. However, in 2006, the European Court of Justice delivered its judgment in a case, the Watts case, which concerned an English NHS patient who required hip replacement surgery and who travelled to France to have the procedure. She subsequently sought to recover the cost of the treatment from her primary care trust. The court found that under the freedom to provide service articles in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, patients have the right to obtain healthcare services, including private healthcare, in another European Economic Area country and be reimbursed on their return home. The patient pays for the treatment up front and has a right to claim reimbursement up to the amount that the same or equivalent treatment would cost had it been provided by the state at home, in Scotland, the NHS. Where the home cost is lower, the actual amount is all that is reimbursed. In July 2008, the European Commission published the draft directive on the application of patients' rights in cross-border healthcare to codify case law and provide a legal framework for cross-border activity. The directive was agreed by the European Parliament in February 2011 and became European law in April of that year. The 2013 regulations transposed the directive into Scottish legislation where necessary. They provide a legal basis for the NHS to introduce prior authorisation arrangements for expensive specialist treatment and limit the amount of reimbursement that the treatment would have cost the NHS in Scotland had it been provided here. Importantly, the home state retains responsibility for deciding what healthcare it will fund on a cross-border basis. The directive is not a way for people to gain entitlement to treatments that would not normally be available at home. Put simply, if you're not entitled to it here, you can't get it there. A key theme of the directive is the emphasis placed on national and local health boards in making information on rights and entitlements publicly available and easily accessible. The intention is to establish a network of national contact points throughout the EU to facilitate exchange of information around healthcare quality, safety, availability and accessibility to help patients make informed choices on the treatment they seek and where it is provided. There will be national contact points in each of the 4 UK countries, linked to each other and to other member states. The appropriate location for Scotland's national contact point is within NH Inform, the information arm of NHS 24. The 2013 regulations designate NH24 to provide this function. The NHS in Scotland provides first-class care with quality and safety at the very heart of all that it does and short waiting times for the vast majority of its services. Therefore, I do not expect that large numbers of Scottish patients will wish to use the European health provisions to travel overseas for treatment that is, for the most part, readily available at home. At this time, it's estimated that fewer than 50 Scots do so in a 12-month period. Like all EU citizens, Scots do, however, have the right to access healthcare in other European countries, and we must ensure that we have legislation in place to allow them to exercise that right if they so wish. The directive, of course, also applies to patients from other parts of Europe who wish to receive treatment in Scotland. However, there has been little, if any, activity in this area to date. NHS boards have a duty to identify and record such activity and will continue to do so. It should, however, be noted that medical priority applies to all patients regardless of their country of origin, and there is no specific requirement on NHS boards to accept patients for planned health care if this would be to the detriment of our own patients with similar health needs. The National Health Service Cross-Border Healthcare Scotland Regulations 2013 provide a stable foundation for patients to exercise their European healthcare rights, for NHS Scotland to handle cross-border healthcare applications and meet our European obligation in this regard. And I'm happy at this stage, Convener, to answer any questions.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. We have a question from Richard Lyle.
Yes, good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Can I welcome your statement and also agree with you that we have one of the best health services in the world. I think this is quite exciting subordinate legislation. And in fact, if you bear with me, Convener, as you already have said, the majority of EU citizens receive healthcare in the member state where they live via the healthcare system. And again, you've stated that they have to have prior approval before they go. But again, with the ad hoc judgments been made in courts based on health systems which are different, the development of an EU directive was seen as necessary. Basically, I want to say that it clarifies, simplifies the rules, facilitates freedom of movement, provides EU citizens with better information on their rights, ensures cross-border health care is safe and high quality, provides cooperation, and also if you have, as I have, you have your EU health card, you can access your EU health care. If and when Scotland becomes independent next year, would you agree that this policy then dispels the myth that if you live in Scotland, you can't go to England and get health care?
Well, absolutely. It's a myth anyway, because already every country has cross-border arrangements, not just in terms of these situations, but, for example, we have had patients transferred to Sweden, for example, for very specialist care, and indeed other countries, including south of the border, have patients come to Scotland for particularly specialist care. Glasgow Southern General Hospital is a very good example of a hospital that has an international reputation for dealing with certain types of head injury, for example. So, absolutely, I would agree totally.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary.
Gil Patterson.
Two quick questions, maybe for information. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary.
Gil.
Is there a cost, if there's a cost attached to travelling for an individual, is that taken into account? That's number one. Number two, if there was a waiting time, which is fairly normal in every country, a person presenting here or someone presenting from here to another country, does that jump the queue in some way, or is it, or do they just get slotted into the system?
Well, if it's a planned care, they would obviously be slotted into the system. If it's an urgent situation, then clearly they would be given priority, because they'd be given priority in Scotland if it was an urgent case. The case I quoted of somebody in the last 3 years who's been treated in Sweden was a very urgent case, and it had to be somebody who was in the hospital had to be ready to accommodate that particular person. In terms of travelling care, it would be very similar to the means-tested approach we have in Scotland in terms of ability to claim travelling expenses. Obviously, if it's planned care, that would be subject to upfront agreement between the patient or the patient's representative and the health board. If it's unplanned care, then they would not be entitled to accommodation costs, but could be entitled to travel costs based on the same scheme for travel costs within Scotland.
Okay, thanks for that.
I mean, do you know, particularly in the Highlands, travel costs is actually a not insignificant feature in, say, the Western Isles Western Isles Health Board budget.
Aileen.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Can I ask whether NHS Scotland, can they refuse to reimburse patients who've received treatment in another European Economic Area country?
They could if they hadn't, if it had been planned care and they hadn't, first of all, received prior authorisation from the Health Service in Scotland. Yes, we can. We're not obliged to pay it in all circumstances. So, broadly speaking, the two circumstances in which this is relevant is, number one, if somebody is travelling in the European Economic Area, which of course includes countries who are out with the EU. Norway is in the economic area, but it's not in the EU. If it's planned care, if somebody's travelling in that area and they have an emergency and they require emergency treatment, it's a genuine emergency, I don't see us refusing to pay for it, quite frankly. If it's somebody who's very clearly abusing the system and trying to jump the queue because they think they'll get too long to wait for a particular procedure in Scotland and they haven't, and they've just gone and got it done in Germany or wherever, we would, under normal circumstances, refuse to pay that.
And in terms of the prior authorisation, what circumstances is prior authorisation, necessary?
Well, one of the things we do, obviously, at the moment is, particularly under the new treatment time guarantee, we always make sure that people have the ability to have the treatment anywhere in Scotland. So if they can't get it within the 12-week period, say, within their own health board, they will be offered other alternatives. For example, if it's an orthopaedic procedure or a heart procedure, they might be offered the service at the Golden Jubilee if it can't be done in their particular health board area within the 12-week period. So if somebody is, if a procedure can only be done outside of Scotland and done within the reasonable time, then normally we would allow that to happen. But normally it would actually be, the first option would be south of the border rather than a foreign country, but it would depend on the procedure and where the speciality existed.
Okay, and when can the prior authorisation, when can that be refused?
It can be refused if it doesn't meet the criteria. For example, there is a specialist list of procedures that people are entitled to, and these are very expensive procedures. So unless there's a very, very good reason, we wouldn't allow somebody or agree on a prior basis to somebody having that procedure elsewhere, particularly if there was spare capacity in Scotland within a reasonable time period.
And just one quick...
Certainly.
And just given the importance of this directive's provisions, are there any plans to make people aware of the contents of this directive? I know you said earlier that fewer than 50 Scots have taken advantage of the cross-border healthcare in the last 12 months, but obviously all Scots have a right to do so if they so wish.
Well, I'm not planning to run a TV advertising campaign, but but at the same time, obviously, in the appropriate circumstances, patients have a right to know what options are available to them, and this is one of the options in certain circumstances available to them. And obviously, a lot of this is coordinated through National Services Scotland.
Thanks very much.
Bob, and then Annette.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I think most of what I was going to ask has been clarified with Aileen McLeod's question. So maybe a slight overlap, but just to be clear, in relation to prior approval for anyone normally resident in Scotland who would go out with Scotland for healthcare to elsewhere within the European Economic Area, would that only be approved on the basis of clinical priority? In other words, if it was for a hip replacement and you knew you were going to get your hip replacement within, say, 12 weeks, but they thought they could go to Spain and get it within 6 weeks, well, that would get them a hip replacement 6 weeks ahead of other people within the queue, for example, Cabinet Secretary. Are there assurances built into the system to make sure, as you said, it would queue jump?
Unless there were other very extenuating circumstances, that's a very good example of where somebody would not get prior agreement to go and have the operation externally. But there is an approval process, and the NSS, being the lead agency within the health service in Scotland, has the overall responsibility for this area of activity and would not give prior approval under those circumstances.
That's helpful, and I suppose I can't really think of an example where someone would speculatively seek to get healthcare in another country under these circumstances, given the fact that to get the money back, prior approval and clinical need and priority would have to be pre-established before they took that journey, unless, of course, it was emergency care. However, for people coming to Scotland from elsewhere in the European Economic Area, is payment to the Scottish NHS or wherever in Scotland, would that be an upfront payment from those travelling to Scotland for healthcare?
Yeah.
Or because I hear anecdotally, and it is only anecdotally, Cabinet Secretary, rather than evidence, that it can be quite difficult at times to reclaim costs from others using the Scottish NHS, where they wouldn't necessarily have that entitlement. Entitlement, of course, to be treated if they need it, but that cross-border transfer of cash to repay the Scottish NHS for the costs incurred. So would that be an upfront payment?
Well, absolutely would be an upfront payment, but let me make a distinction between people coming to Scotland, and as I stated, you know, they are very few and far between in terms of this kind of activity. And I think some of the press coverage on this issue, particularly relating to south of the border, has been around people coming from out with the European Economic Area, and that's where the difficulty has arisen in recouping some of the costs.
That's very helpful. I read similar press reports, and it's good that you get the chance to clarify that at committee this morning. I don't have any further questions, Cabinet Secretary.
Great, thank you.
Nanette.
It was just very briefly to ask if we know where the other UK nations are with regard to adopting these regulations.
I think they've all got to adopt them. I'm not absolutely sure what stage they're at, but they've all got to adopt them. Let me say the policy has been adopted for a number of years. This is us only transposing this into legislation. So there were interim arrangements in Scotland. This is the more permanent transposition, which is required under EU law. But we can check that and inform the committee exactly where the other three nations are.
Be interesting to know.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I get some clarification, Cabinet, saying about, I mean, this is for planned procedures. This is, as my Vice Convener explained, you know, trying to get it earlier, or whether it's not available, it's not suitable, and it's easier to travel to that area. It's for planned procedures. But you mentioned emergency procedures earlier on. Now, how would this impact on emergencies in Spain or any out with Scotland, as Bob described? How, you know, would the current arrangements not apply? If somebody goes to Benidorm and has a stroke, what happens? What happens now, and what will happen after this is?
No, what happens is they would have a European health insurance card, and they would use that.
No, that doesn't change these situations.
No, this is for planned treatment. The
for
cross-border stuff is for planned
treatment. The Cabinet
treatment.
Secretary mentioned emergency treatments.
Well, that's where your European insurance card
So
that
it
Mr
doesn't
Lyle has
affect
got.
it doesn't affect emergency treatments.
No.
Just planned treatment.
But obviously, if somebody was in a road traffic accident in Scotland and they weren't from within Scotland, you know, we would treat them right away and then sort out the finances once we get the person sorted. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that the first thing we would do is ask for their credit card.
No, but you know, when we travel out with Scotland, we're expected to take insurance.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a problem with people not taking insurance.
And
how would they be affected for add-on costs, or how would that?
Well, it's the same as if you go abroad. If you go abroad without insurance and you require emergency treatment, then you're liable to pay for that emergency treatment yourself.
Right. So just to have a bit of fun at Richard's expense, does that mean I'll need to get holiday insurance to go to England or Wales in the future?
Well, it depends what the arrangement is.
Well,
but,
you know, I didn't want to get into the comedy, but I thought it was worth asking. Gil Patterson.
I would take insurance out anyway.
Yeah, we'll accept that. We'll
Having had a
accept
family
that.
accident abroad 2 years ago, head injury, present your card, it's all done, taken care of. Carry the card and you're fine.
I'm glad you had that experience, but we read on regular reports about it. It's not as simple as that for people across, and we just to get clarification. It's mainly for planned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
You know, Convener, I've got to say that this actually expires. What is it? Year? Well, 8th of 8th, 2015. I haven't taken out insurance anywhere I've went in Europe. I've taken my card with me.
Well, you heard the Cabinet Secretary's advice, Richard. He's a friend of yours. Get
Yes, I
insurance.
will always take the Cabinet Secretary's
Even if it's
advice.
England or Wales, the Cabinet Secretary said. Anyway, we must press on. We now move to... I don't think there is any other questions. We now move on to agenda item number 5, which is the formal debate on the National Health Service cross-border healthcare Scotland Regulations 2013 in which we have just taken evidence. Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move the motion S4M 07760?
I formally move, Convener.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Is there any members wish to, in the debate, it's not a question, Richard, it's a debate. You can come in. But,
Well, the debate is, should it be passed? And I believe it's one of the most exciting pieces of legislation that I've seen in this, in the 2.5 years I've been here. And I think it brings over, it puts across the factor that people can go abroad and also can get freedom of movement, supports patient choice, provides every EU citizen with better information on their rights, and I think it's an excellent piece of legislation.
Gil Patterson.
I just heard my colleague said he's getting excited with legislation. I think he needs to see the doctor.
Bob.
In fact, I'm not sure how you follow that, Convener,
no,
but the answer is you probably don't. It is an opportunity during the debate to raise a wider issue in terms of Scottish citizens or UK citizens in other European countries where they maybe don't have their European health card on them, and some of the internal procedures within those countries can be that if you don't show it at the point of accessing the accident, emergency or hospital, you are expected quite often to pay up front, and there are accounting procedures to have the Scottish NHS reimburse that, but it could be made quite difficult not by the Scottish NHS but the internal accounting procedures of other European Union countries. So I'm not sure I would deem this as exciting, but it is very, very important. And actually there's still work to be done, not at a Scottish level but at a European level, to make sure those accounting procedures by which Scottish citizens are reimbursed for healthcare elsewhere in the European Economic Area are expedited, because I know from constituency cases it can take a number of years for people to be reimbursed. And again, I thought that was appropriate to put on the record given the context of this debate.
Do any other members wish to take part in the debate? No, thank you. Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to sum up?
I'm happy to take the debate as read, Convener. I think obviously this is something we have to do under European legislation, and as I think the members of the committee have made clear, it's something that's beneficial to our citizens and indeed the citizens of Europe.
Okay, thank you. I now put the question on S4M 07760. Are we all agreed? Thank the committee. Suspend very briefly while we change officials. We now move to our final agenda item, which is to take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary at stage 1 of the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Bill. The Cabinet Secretary has been joined by Kathleen Bessis, the Deputy Director for Health and Social Care Integration, and Alison Taylor, Team Leader Director for Health and Social Care Integration. I invite the Cabinet Secretary. Yeah. But John was there earlier, was he not? You didn't move, John, did you? Good. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to make an opening statement. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Bill. And I'll just take a few minutes to say a word or two about the bill. First of all, in terms of the overview, as the committee is aware, this bill provides the framework for the integration of health and social care and sits alongside the Self-Directed Support Act and other key policies to deliver the Scottish Government's personalisation agenda. The bill promotes person-centred planning and delivery to ensure joined-up, seamless health and social care services with the aim of improving outcomes for service users, carers and their families. We will do this by legislating for national health and wellbeing outcomes that will underpin the requirement for health boards and local authorities to plan effectively together to deliver quality, sustainable care services for their constituent populations. Importantly, the bill aims to bring together the substantial resources of health and social care to deliver joined-up, effective and efficient services that meet the increasing number of people with longer-term and often complex needs, many of whom are older. We're all aware of the criticism made by Audit Scotland of failure of community health partnerships, and that is why this bill focuses on bringing together the accountability of statutory partners, health boards and local authorities to jointly deliver better outcomes for patients, service users and carers. Too long have health boards and local authorities ended up in a cycle of cost shunting. The bill requires health boards and local authorities to 1. Establish integrated arrangements through partnership working, 2. Provides for 2 models, delegation to a body corporate, established as a joint board or delegation to each other as a lead agency. The health boards and local authorities will be required to delegate functions and budgets to the integrated partnership. These will be as a minimum adult primary care and community care, adult social care and aspects of acute hospital services. Secondary legislation will set out functions that integrated partnerships will be able to include, such as housing or children's services, where there is local arrangement to do so. Indeed, there are areas across Scotland, such as West Lothian and Highland, where this is already working well. Each partnership will be required to establish locality planning arrangements, which will provide a forum for local professional leadership of service planning and will encompass an assets-based approach, building in local knowledge and best practice to meet the needs of the local population. The integrated partnership will be required to prepare and implement a strategic commissioning plan which will use the totality of resources available across health and social care to plan for the health and social care needs of local populations. Importantly, professionals, service users, GPs, the third and independent sectors will be embedded in this process as key stakeholders in shaping the redesign of services. Alongside the Self-Directed Support Act and the Children and Young People Bill, the Public Bodies Joint Working Bill is part of the Government's broader agenda to deliver public services that better meet the needs of the people and the our communities. The bill provides the legislative framework for partnership working both at a strategic and local level, involving professionals, service users and partners. The planning and delivery principles in the bill encapsulate the principles of Christie, putting the person at the centre of service planning and delivery, and requires a focus on prevention and anticipatory care planning. This committee has not only taken evidence from a range of stakeholders this month, but heard during its inquiry into integration that there is wide support for the principles of the bill. For some who are already progressing well with shadow integrated arrangements, the bill may seem unnecessary. However, I think we're all in agreement that not enough progress has been made under the existing permissive legislation, though we have not started from a blank sheet of paper. Many areas across Scotland are already working in partnership to deliver integrated services. Furthermore, we've considered the evidence from across the UK and we're mindful about applying this in a Scottish context. But I am clear that in order to achieve a consistency of progress, it's necessary to set out in legislation a framework which will deliver the necessary changes to meet the future demands and services. I believe the bill strikes the right balance in setting the framework for integration, making the necessary requirements on health boards and local authorities to deliver effective integration of health and social care, and providing the flexibility to develop arrangements that best suit local circumstances. And I welcome the opportunity to further clarify the bill.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Gil Patterson.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think, Cabinet Secretary, it's safe to say that the evidence that this committee has heard so far, either orally or written evidence, suggests that there's unanimity across the sector that integration is a good thing, that people would like to see it happen. In fact, I may be corrected by the officials here, but I don't think there's a single solitary submission saying that integration is a bad thing. However, there comes if, buts and maybes. And, the suggestion is that the reason for the failure in the past has been lack of good leadership. That seems to be one of the key factors. And, there's a need for cultural change. So if that's the case, if that's what we're hearing from right across everybody that's involved in this, that, this would be welcome, it should happen. So why the need for legislation? Why not just let it happen itself?
Well, basically, many attempts have been made to try and make it happen, and without statutory underpinning, it hasn't happened. It's happened in one or two areas, West Lothian being the most notable example, but in actual fact, without statutory underpinning, it has not happened. And indeed, there are one or two areas where there, quite frankly, is still resistance to these proposals. And my view is that without integration, we cannot deliver the quality of care that we require to deliver to our adult population, in particular the disabled population and older people, without the full integration of adult health and social care services. And quite frankly, our view very strongly, based on the evidence of the last 10, 20 years, is that it will not happen without statutory underpinning. And that statutory underpinning, hopefully, not only will make it happen on the ground throughout Scotland, but also will help itself to change the culture, both in health boards and in local authorities, so that people see the need to put the person at the end user, the patient, at the centre of everything we do, and give overriding consideration to their needs rather than the particular needs of either a health board or a local authority.
Your answer, which I'm grateful for, but it leads to another question. If people are saying that it was leadership, that or the lack of leadership, where's the provision for good leadership, or is that an excuse? Is it an excuse, the leadership thing, rather than protecting their own individual empires, if you like?
Well, I think leadership is part of the equation. It's part of the jigsaw of making it happen. Leadership at national level, which is what we're providing with this very bill. And in fact, I've spoken to, for example, Ian Gray, a former minister in charge of social justice, and he told me his experience was, and he now said he regrets that he didn't actually underpin the plans he had at that time with legislation, because without the legislation it will not work. And the leadership tends to pull the other way in terms of the vested interests of local authorities or the vested interest of the health board. What this does is make sure that the leadership has to pull with integration, both in the health board and in the local authorities, and in the corporate body model itself or in the lead agency model. The leadership comes from the chief accounting officer or from the lead agency if it's a lead agency model. So basically this bill actually ensures the leadership at national level as well as the leadership at local level as well.
Sorry, I might just add to what the Cabinet Secretary has said. We've been clear from the beginning that the legislation in itself will not change the mindsets of practitioners on the ground and create the leadership. So alongside the legislative work, we have got a significant piece of work under the way on strategic workforce development. And for us, the strategic workforce development, which I can say a little bit more about if you like, plus the work to support locality development and strategic commissioning, is where this is all going to land or not land appropriately. The Strategic Workforce Development Group will produce, probably by the end of October, a framework for action which will cover the types of issues that the committee member has raised, which is around what is the support for organisational development, what is the support for the joint boards around culture, language, communications, what's the support that chief officers will need to provide the type of strategic leadership that will be required in a very complex situation.
We will say something about management development, education and training for professionals, and we'll say something about the ongoing work we have to develop commissioning skills in order to create a proper commissioning framework. So there's a whole load of work that we're going to do in the financial memorandum, identified resource that we will make available to partnerships to support their transition into what is a new working environment.
Can I also say, actually, in the areas where it's already happening, if you go to Highland, I was up in the Royal Infirmary in Inverness a few months ago, and people who had probably previously been working with the Health Board are working with the local authority and are now working in an integrated setting. They think, you know, and some of them were sceptical, and they admitted they were a bit sceptical, but they now are saying to me, this really is the right way to go, and I found many examples of that, of where integration's already working on the ground.
I'm not entirely sure that leadership is the real question here, to be quite honest, because there's some real good people there, but they're not engaged.
Yeah, it
But
varies. I think it varies between different areas, Gil.
I'm just wondering that what's been, you know, also in business or in local government, in national government, there's always vested interests. I don't think you can ever take vested interests out of the equation. That's just it is, you know, they protect budgets and protect their own wee areas, or big areas for that matter. I'm just wondering if you would agree with me that what's actually effectively happening with this bill is the vested interest gets much, much wider. So it encapsulates a much, much greater area, that, you know, the sphere of influence and vested interest encapsulates most of the population. That's what I see from the bill. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but that's my interpretation of what you're trying to achieve.
Well, certainly we want to make sure everybody's got a vested interest in delivering to what will be the national outcomes, and that's very clear, whether it's in terms of the strategic commissioning, in terms of the budgetary procedures, in terms of how the constitution of these bodies is established, in terms of the reporting mechanisms. Is to try to make sure that everybody's vested interest is in providing the best possible service to the end user.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Convener.
Just on the, I mean, I think we had some, you know, evidence. We know you're having discussions with COSLA. You may want to bring us up to date about how that discussion's going on. But to summarise, you know, and I'm not saying this is how it is, but how I view it, that they are saying that you are taking, or the Cabinet Secretary is taking, wide powers without their knowledge about how you would use those powers and what circumstances you would use those powers. No rules of engagement, but you're taking all of these powers on as their fear. And in addition to that, there's a question of how you can be impartial in this whole process. Your Cabinet Secretary of Health is there to protect, sustain and promote the health service. So they perceive an imbalance here, which I think is crucial going forward, if that's to be resolved. So maybe if you can either agree or disagree that these are some of the issues about where the power lies and your role in that process, and in those powers, what circumstances would they be used? Do we need to have clear rules of engagement here?
Well, the first thing is although I'm called the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing, I'm also the Cabinet Secretary responsible for adult social care. So the idea that there's a conflict of interest is just not the case, you know, because I already have responsibility for adult social care. And obviously I exercise those responsibilities today, and my predecessors exercised those same responsibilities. Secondly, COSLA have expressed some concern that they believe there was a need for tighter definition of what we mean by social care in the bill, because their concern was that the way in which the bill is drafted could be interpreted that I have the power basically not just over social care but over a whole gambit of local authority services. So we've been working at both political and official level, and we've agreed that we will bring forward amendments to stage 2 of the bill, jointly, you know, agreed between COSLA and ourselves, which will, I think, absolutely allay any fears that I'm trying to widen my powers. My cabinet colleagues wouldn't want that to happen anyway, I'm absolutely sure. So the bill with these amendments will make it absolutely definitively clear in the bill what is meant by the powers that are defined in the bill in relation to social care, and don't cover much wider areas of responsibility within local authorities. Thirdly, in terms of rules of engagement, a lot of this, convener, will be followed up in secondary legislation, in guidance and so on, but fundamentally, the point of the bill, and we've been very clear and indeed agreed right up front from day one with COSLA and others on this, that the bill should provide a national framework and provide binding principles. For example, strategic commissioning, the national outcomes and things of that nature, define the different models in principle that are available to deliver this. But it's always been agreed that beyond that, we want to leave as much discretion as makes sense to local areas to make their own detailed arrangements, and for the bill not to be overly prescriptive. And I think that's a sensible way to go. Now, there are some things that people have mentioned. I heard the previous discussion, obviously, when I sat through the last 20 minutes of the panel discussion. And some of the issues that were mentioned will be covered in secondary legislation for various reasons that no doubt we'll discuss in more detail later on this morning. It doesn't make sense to put some of those things in the face of the bill. It makes more sense to put them either in secondary legislation or guidance.
I'm sure you understand in the evidence that we've taken,
Yes,
people are all on board, as Gil Patterson said, and indeed this committee is on board with us. But I mean, just a specific example, I suppose, is this contention about the shifting budget.
Yeah.
And the evidence we've heard, if we can put all of that in place, we can enable the legislature, if we don't shift the budget, particularly according to COSLA, from the acute sector into the community. Now, I think it's at that point that your position would be tested about whether you could deliver a substantial, what they wanted is a top cut of money from the health service into the community. Now, that's a difficult call for the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing.
Well, let me say right away, in terms of the acute budget, I don't think you can just have a simplistic percentage cut, and then redirect that. I don't think that is the right way to plan ahead. But the whole strategic commissioning role of the partnership is absolutely crucial here. Now, what will be the case, and we're already in agreement with COSLA in this, that where there is an acute budget related to the responsibilities of the partnership, that will be very transparent. How much is being spent on acute care in relation to the overall responsibilities of the partnership. And there will be then the ability of the partnership to influence the acute care budget. For example, let me give you an example. And I'll get Kathleen to say this in a bit more detail, but let me give you an example. One of the areas where we can substantially reduce, in my estimation, the number of hospitalisations which could be done, which are unnecessary, is in terms of a COPD, long-term condition. We are hospitalising many people who, if the proper support was available in the community, these people would not need hospitalised or need hospitalised as often. So we've got a situation where the budgets for dealing with these people, because of the rate of hospitalisation, is covered in the acute budget. We want to move some of that into the community. So what the strategic commissioning plan would do, and it would be a plan, would say over a period of years, in agreement with the acute providers, we will shift resources into the community in a planned way, so that, say, within 3 or 4 years' time, those people suffering, say, from COPD, many more of them will be treated in the community rather than in the acute setting, and the money effectively will follow the patient in those circumstances.
I agree with COSLA and others that one of the key aspects of this is to shift the flow from the acute sector in terms of people and budgets into the community.
Well, that's one of the things we want to achieve, because we do know we are hospitalising people far too often when if the resources were available in the community, they would not need to be hospitalised. Now, if you look at the economics of this, it costs on average £4,600 a week to keep somebody in an acute hospital in Scotland. It costs on average about £300 a week to treat them at home. If it's a chronic condition, really serious chronic condition, it's probably on average nearer £800 or £900. But that's still, it makes economic sense. But the important thing is, where we've done that, and this is a really important point, is the health outcomes for the patient have been substantially improved. You know, particularly older people, you know, one of the worst things you can do is unnecessarily hospitalise them. So we're all at one in this. I don't know if Kathleen wants to spell out the kind of, but you can do it later.
On supplementary on this? Yeah.
No, it's
Got a big
just
list.
Cabinet Secretary, to clarify, some of us were at West Lothian yesterday,
yeah,
and it's to do with widening the integration agenda, if you like, and it's quite clear there that they're working on the adult health and social care, but they were also talking in terms of how important housing was, and looking at children's services as well. So how does that tie in with what COSLA is saying to you, about restricting it?
Well, let's be clear. What we're talking about is the core of the partnership board, the voting membership of the partnership board in each local authority area, where it's the corporate model, will be made up of equal representation between the health board and the local authority. If they decide they want to co-opt non-voting members onto the board, they will have the right to do so. But beyond that, there'll then be a whole host of the infrastructure around that is where the likes of services like housing will be heavily involved, particularly in the locality planning. I think housing has a really important role to play. And again, the secondary legislation will spell this out and the guidance in some more detail.
It's helpful, thank you.
Malcolm Chisholm and then Richard Lyle.
Just by way of introduction, I think what Kathleen Bessler said about the wider agenda is very important, because I think all the witnesses have said structural change in itself can't deliver what's required. But most of them, I think with the exception of SIPFA, have gone along in general terms with what's in the bill. So I suppose what interests me is the detail of it. So, but I suppose there's two areas where I'm sort of seeking clarity. One we've already started talking about through the convener in terms of the acute budgets. You said in your presentation, Cabinet Secretary, aspects of acute hospital services, and there you gave the example of COPD. I mean, I suppose, well, there's first of all the example of the question of who's going to decide, but I presume in terms of what you're proposing, it's up to the, well, I don't know, is it the health board that will decide, or is it the partnership that,
no,
anyway, so who decides? But I suppose the more fundamental question is, how much of these acute budgets is to be shifted? Because is it basically money to pay for re-provisioning in the community, or is it a much larger block of acute budgets? Because you're probably aware of the concern, in fact, from my own health board, that in fact it sounds as if you might be taking a much larger block of the acute budget, and you would then be getting the position of the corporate body commissioning from the acute sector, and that's where this language about return of commissioner provider or even purchaser provider has come into it. So it's really quite important, I think, to know in detail how this is actually to work in terms of how much money is being transferred, and then what the relationship is between the corporate body and the rest of the health service.
I'm going to get Kathleen just to explain the exact mechanics of how this is going to work, because I think it's an important point for people to understand the detail of the mechanics of it. But first of all, can I say, Malcolm, I won't be reallocating anything. It will be entirely a local decision, and it will be driven in this case by the joint board, by the corporate body or the lead agency in the Highlands. So it's not me that's making these decisions. There's going to be 32 decision-making bodies across the country who will make these decisions. But the important point is, at the end of the day, a key point of this whole exercise is to substantially increase the acute care in the community. And, if we weren't going to give these joint boards some responsibility for the acute budget, then it would defeat that particular purpose of the integration agenda. But I don't think we should think in terms of a precise percentage of the acute budget, and I'll tell you why. If you pick an acute hospital like, say, Perth Royal Infirmary and compare it to the Glasgow Southern General, the Glasgow Southern General has a much wider remit than just the local authority area that it's serving. Now, Perth Royal Infirmary does serve people outside the Perth area, but obviously Glasgow Southern General is a teaching hospital. It's got a range of other responsibilities. So the way in which its acute budget, if you just took a percentage of it and it would be said, you know, it's a percentage of the acute budget across the country to be transferred, the impact on that in different areas would be extremely different because of the different roles that some of the, particularly the bigger hospitals, play. So that's why it has to be very much a local decision dependent on the configuration of acute services in each particular area. Now I'm going to ask Kathleen to just explain to you the budgetary process and how we particularly deal with this point of the acute plan, which, you know, starts with the transparency, which is unprecedented, of the acute budget.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the important thing is that we stick with the principle that the resources that are associated with the functions that are delegated to the joint board go with the functions. So that's the really important point, and that can be clearly articulated. The key question then becomes about, well, which aspects of acute resources lend themselves to be used in a different way. So clearly not all of acute services, neurosurgery and all of that kind of stuff, there's things that do not lend themselves to be redesigned to support an improved pathway of care, particularly for older people. So we've been working very closely with the chief executives of the NHS boards to unpick the complexities, as the Cabinet Secretary have said, about how do you land this thing which gives enough influence for changes to how acute budgets are used without introducing, one, incredible amounts of bureaucracy or complete chaos and confusion and the potential for the acute service not to be able to plan coherently and coherently across their patch because we have more than one local authority area. So we think we have got a position that's been agreed with COSLA and with NHS boards around what does that model look like. So clearly what we're saying is that the strategic commissioning plan has to describe the scope of the services, the money that's in scope. And then within that commissioning plan, there will be decisions taken by the Partnership Board in discussion with the Health Board and the Council and others about the time frame around which changes will happen around acute services, and that those resources that then will be realigned, redeployed as that commissioning plan is operationalised. So, for example, community acute hospitals, it is likely that all of that budget will go with the functions and be into the integrated pot. So on a day-to-day basis, that resource can be used flexibly. But in redesigning, realigning some aspects of acute service, that needs to sit within the context of the agreed commissioning plan, the timescale over which the change will happen, and complete transparency about what resource is available to be redeployed. Now, it's not clearly the whole of the acute budget, but we think we have got a model. And the Deputy Director for Health Finance in Scottish Government has already asked partnerships to give an early indication, a very early indication, about what kind of percentages of resources would be in scope. And I'm sure that once she has a comprehensive picture, she would not be unhappy to share what the kind of generality of that picture looks like, given that partners are at early days and working through the amount. But it is a significant amount in scope. It is really a significant amount.
Of that detail could be provided to the committee and more generally, because I think it's become one of the main points of interest in the discussions, and I know there is concern about this in some health boards, so I mean I probably could ask lots of follow-up questions. I mean, I suppose one basic question might be, I mean, is that decision a decision of the corporate body, or is it a decision of the health board in terms of how much money? Because you can see lots of scope for tension between those two. And I suppose the general point, which everybody knows, is that even in terms of shifting the balance of care because of demography, it's not as if, you know, health board budgets probably can, you know, acute budgets can be decreased in absolute
Yes,
terms. So,
exactly.
I mean, there's just so many questions
But
around
the
that.
key, that's where the key tool, Malcolm, is the commissioning plan, the strategic commissioning plan, because clearly, if you take the COPD example, and let's say it's Edinburgh in your own area, because a significant amount, the health board signed up to the Edinburgh scenario. But let's say you take COPD, part of the strategic commissioning plan is to treat, let's say, far more, it might even specify percentage of COPD patients in the community. Now, that will require acute consultants to work in the community. It won't just require GPs to provide that service. It will require actually people who are acute consultants to work in the community. But the pace at which it's done, the resource allocation, the way in which it's done should all be part of the strategic commissioning plan. The strategic commissioning plan has to be drawn up by the joint board, because obviously Edinburgh's a corporate body model, but in wide consultation, not just between the health board and the local authority, but a range of other bodies as well. And that's all built into the legislation, the consultation group on the strategic commissioning plan. That's all in the legislation, and that's a requirement, so that it's not just a case of a unilateral decision. It has to be done in consultation with all the key stakeholders, and then once the plan's agreed, then everybody is signed up to it.
Yes, just to pick up on a technical detail, the bill sets out that in the original agreement between the health board and the local authority, which is described in the bill as the integration plan, that agreement sets out the functions, and it's described in the bill as the method of calculation for payments to go with the functions into the integrated arrangement. So at an overarching level, at the level of the framework that the Cabinet Secretary has been talking about, the health board and the local authority in their initial discussions, within the parameters of what's defined as what must go in, which will be in regulation, have that discussion. And then once you get into the mechanics of working out how to improve outcomes, it's exactly as the Cabinet Secretary has said, the determination comes into the strategic planning process.
Well, I mean, I think that's fine for the management of a particular condition like COPD, but when it comes to the more general question of shifting the balance of care and reducing emergency admission, I think it becomes a bit more difficult. But I think it would be helpful if we had some more detail on that. But my second area is only one more, convener, where there's been a lot of discussion is just, again, in the precise governance arrangement, and in particular the position of the chief officer of a corporate body. And again, I'm drawing on what people in my own area are saying. I think both the council and the health board in Edinburgh saying this, that there is a view that the balance has shifted more than was intended towards the chief officer, and that in fact far more responsibility and decision-making power is located there, and that in some ways there's a weaker relationship with local authorities and health boards than was intended in the original consultation document. So I would just welcome any views on that, and whether you've had discussions with various health boards and local authorities about that.
Yeah, can I just be absolutely clear? The chief accounting officer, that person will be appointed by the joint board. He will be, or she, reporting to the joint board. So this is not somebody who can go and make unilateral decisions on their own. They are answerable to the joint board. Now, they have to be employed by either the local authority or the health board for a whole host of other reasons. That's not to say that somebody who's not currently employed by the health board or the local authority couldn't be the joint accounting officer. It could be somebody applies for the job, but it would then need to be decided who is their employer. That's a kind of technical issue. So the first thing to stress is the joint accountable officer is responsible to and reports to the board. It's not somebody that's unaccountable. The second thing is, on a strategic level, they also report simultaneously to the chief executive of the health board and the local authority. So there is very clear lines laid out for the role and the powers and the job description for the chief accounting officer. And I think some of these fears are maybe based on misconceptions rather than real fears, because it's very clear to us that the officer and what the officer does is very much under the control of the corporate board.
Well, I mean, the view has been expressed that the policy intention has not been translated into the wording of the bill, so that's something we'll have to look at stage 2.
We will do look at that.
I think that's right. I think we've got an HR technical working group looking at this, and I think the comment has been made, and we've registered that the chief officer is accountable to the joint board for developing and delivering the strategic plan. However, the chief officer has an operational line to the two chief exec for the operational discharge of that responsibility. So I think we will be doing further work to clarify that, because I think that's a legitimate point.
We are looking at whether we need to bring forward an amendment to stage 2 so that there's no dubiety on the issue, Malcolm.
Interesting exchange. I've got a wee parochial one on it, but I'm going to Richard Lyle, and I'm just concerned with the answers there about the flow of acute budgets coming from non-specialist hospitals, and I just worry about the sustainability of local hospitals who are providing acute services. It seems to be that will be the focus of drawing some of the budget out. I might be wrong there, but I just note the concern. Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Convener. Can I again say that I welcome the intentions and the objectives of this bill. Yesterday I was fortunate enough to be in a delegation visit to West Lothian, and I was very impressed with both what West Lothian are doing and also what they're doing in the local hospital, and I take on board the comments that you made. Later in the afternoon we actually had another visit to speak with, and you mentioned what you want to see is people from disabled backgrounds being involved. There was one of the questions was, how involved will they be? And when you speak about who's on the board, and you also said that there will be voting rights for each section from the council and from NHS, but what independent people will we have on these boards? Are we going to put on the face of the bill who shall be on this board? And the comment I made to one of the questions that was asked of me, there may be 100 organisations want on the board. We can't have 100 organisations at the top table, but do we intend to specify or to look at who should be at the top table?
Yeah, there's a specification, for example, that there should be a representative from the staff side and a representative from the public. But I think the question goes wider about the accountability of these bodies more widely. Now, we've got a piece of work going on looking at how we can enhance the accountability of the health service generally, but also of the integrated boards in terms of the future. And that, we actually don't think there's a need to do any more in the bill on that. We think we've got all the powers we need to do, and if we need to do anything by secondary legislation, we would do it. But we are looking at the wider issue of wider accountability to make sure that there is genuine accountability publicly. Now, the fact that half of these boards are made up of elected councillors in itself enhances accountability, one would have thought. And obviously the other half is representatives of the health boards, and we're looking specifically at how we can enhance the accountability in the health boards. As you know, we've trialled direct elections to health boards. We've trialled some other ways of improving accountability, and I hope to be making a statement sometime soon before Christmas on the general issues of improving accountability. The absolute guarantee is that we need to make sure that all the key stakeholders, the public, the end users, the third sector, the independent sector, as it states in the bill, right through the bill, they've got to be involved, not just consulting. They've got to be involved, both at the partnership level and, I think more importantly, actually, at the locality level, because I think that's where a lot of the key decisions as far as the end users are concerned are going to be made.
Well, can I welcome that comment, and I think they should be involved. Can I ask another question which I was asked yesterday, which I actually couldn't answer? Why did we change the name on the bill to the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Bill? And this is where I think COSLA got a bit upset and thought that you were going to grab powers from everywhere else, and the Cabinet Secretary of different areas were going to grasp all these extra powers. So why did we change the name? of the bill from what it was when it first came out?
Let me say that it's not an enabling bill of the kind that have been done in previous periods of history by other regimes. This arose, and this is where the lawyers come in, and including the Parliament lawyers. One of the things we are doing in the bill, and this is what really initiated the change in the title of the bill, is that what used to be called the Common Services Agency is, under this bill, will now be able to provide services much wider than the health service in Scotland. It will now be able to provide services across the entire public sector, and that will be good for public sector efficiency, cost effectiveness and improvement in the delivery of service provision. But because we included that particular provision in the bill, the original intended title was no longer legally competent, and we therefore had to amend the bill. And while I fully accept it's not the sexiest title of any bill in the world, I think the important thing is the substance of the bill rather than necessarily the title of the bill.
And my last question, you heard me asking the question earlier about VAT. You have local government, you have NHS. Do we have any concerns in what work has been taken in order to ensure that no extra VAT is being paid when this bill goes through?
Well, we're in a state of very advanced negotiations with HMRC on this very issue, and although I can't forecast exactly what the outcome will be, I'm reasonably confident we will hopefully end up in a position where there will be no VAT implications in terms of any additional expenditure on VAT arising from these measures. In 2016, of course, we'll have powers over HMRC, and we can rectify any matters that require any outstanding activity after that.
I certainly agree with that comment. Thank you, Convener.
Bob Doris, you want to supplement on that?
Yes, thanks, Convener. It's been, Mr Lyle used the expression top table, and I think you kind of hinted in your answer, Cabinet Secretary, when you mentioned locality planning. It's a bit of information in who would sit at, let's say, that wider strategic table rather than top table doing the sign-off of strategic plans, because there's been a expectation almost that various other bodies, and I won't list through them all because I will miss one out, and they'll take a slight upon that they're not as strategically important as others, but just thought about who might sit at that wider strategic table and whether there'd be voting rights, but more importantly, a little bit more about the locality plans where there'll be a statutory obligation to produce, because it was the expression top table that motivated my supplementary, because I see this bill as being a community planning initiative as much as it is a top-down initiative. Just a little bit more about the importance of locality planning would be quite helpful, and perhaps that's a particular area where some of these other stakeholders could definitely be involved in the front line.
Well, obviously the bill, I mean, as I said earlier, the key thing in all of this is the strategic commissioning plan. That really determines exactly what each board will do, and we've been quite specific. It's one area of the bill where we have been actually quite prescriptive in terms of the consultation group that has to be set up and the people who have to be involved in the development of the strategic commissioning plan. And very clearly, I would like this to be as much a bottom-up process as it is any top-down process, because very clearly what's in that commissioning plan should be largely determined by what's happening in the community and what the needs of the community are in terms of adult health and social care. I'm going to ask Alison to spell out, without getting into inordinate detail, but to give you a flavour of how we see typically the locality planning mechanism working and who'd be involved in that.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. We're not, as you can see from the bill, setting out a prescriptive process around locality planning, and that's in direct response to what stakeholders have said to us, particularly stakeholders and partners who are actually already doing something like locality planning well. And it would be difficult, I think, to find two examples that were particularly similar. There is huge local variation in how something like locality planning works well, who exactly is around the table, depending on the balance of local need, how often they meet, what sort of decisions they look at, that kind of thing. So I think this is an area where the onus is very much on us to encourage and develop local innovation and not to be prescriptive. There are powers in the bill at various points for setting out the range of people who need to be involved in strategic planning and need to be consulted upon and this kind of thing. Again, I don't think ministers have it in mind, be particularly prescriptive about the numbers of people who would be involved or that sort of thing, because I think that those are matters which the evidence tells us work better when they are agreed locally. I do think in locality planning in particular there needs to be a very strong role for local clinical professionals. I think we can see some very good examples from memory. NHS Grampian has some interesting examples. There's an interesting model at work in Nairn. There's a lot to be learned from these places, and that's where our attention should go, I would say.
Can I just check something, Convener, if that's okay? So in terms of that local engagement, will there be anything in guidance in terms of...
Yes, absolutely. I apologise, I should have said that, yes.
And in terms of the wider strategic plan, just because maybe other bodies are not on the face of the bill, it's not a restrictive piece of legislation that there's nothing to stop joint boards having other partners and co-opting them on, perhaps without voting rights, for example?
I think a good comparison, Bob, is if you go for planning permission to build a new building, there are statutory consultees who absolutely must be consulted, but you have a wider consultation. You must show you've consulted the wider community. It's a very similar kind of process. There's some minimum statutory consultees, but that's the de minimis position.
And some best practice guidance around that?
Yes, absolutely.
There's already guidance around strategic commissioning in force, which is where we're learning a lot of the lessons, but we will produce guidance in relation to this bill, which will build on that. We've also sent out the All Hands on Deck locality report, which is out there now, which kind of describes the key principles around locality planning. We've asked partnerships with some support from Joint Improvement Team to look at that, to see how that fits in their local circumstances, use it as a template to start working things through, and in January we'll get some feedback, and that feedback from the actual putting into practice some of this report guidance, we will use to put in proper guidance, and we'll go consult on that.
Very helpful, thank you, Convener.
Oda Grant.
Thank you, Convener. We've heard evidence about concerns over things like governance, finance, audit, staffing, sharing information, the list goes on and on. How can this be put in place, that a satisfactory solution to those issues be put in place?
Well, that's a long list, Rhoda, that you've just read out. I have to say, I think some of them are misplaced. I mean, for example, the issue of governance raised about COSLA. I'm absolutely sure that we'll reach agreement with COSLA and the amendments at stage 2 that are required to be brought forward to address. It was never our intention to give me such wide-ranging powers over local authorities beyond what we're intending to do in the bill. In terms of the funding, I think we've had a good discussion this morning on the budgetary process. We'll provide additional briefing just on the mechanics of it and the flow of how the budgetary decisions will be made. The key point is that the budget will be an integrated budget, so we will no longer have the ridiculous position where for each patient in a hospital there is a dogfight between the health board and the local authority about who pays when the patient is discharged, as a result of which we end up with delayed discharges. So there's a whole range of things like that. I actually think that this will end up, once it's fully operational, with a much more efficient and efficacious use of public funding, and a good example of that is to reduce the levels of unnecessary hospitalisation, because if we're able to do that, it leads to much better patient outcomes, but it also means that we, instead of spending so much money and having people unnecessarily in an acute setting in a hospital being treated at home, it will free up resources to improve the quality of care more generally. But certainly, we've been listening very carefully, and we are listening very carefully to what people are saying. We have any number of groups. We have a bill advisory group on which all the key bodies are represented. We have a ministerial steering group that I personally chair. We have an implementation group. We have 8 working parties. Just for starters on all of this. So the one thing we've done with this bill is we've been consulting and continue to consult very widely, and obviously when we get the stage 1 report from the committee, we will take, as we always do, very seriously any recommendations from the committee.
If I can then maybe be more specific, because I think you've covered those points previously, but take, for example, audit and, you know, different audit criteria happens within local government, happens within health, their internal audit processes, external audit processes and the like. How will the body corporate carry out an audit function? What will be their audit function? What will they need to put in place?
Well, can I first of all say the National Audit Office are actually part of our group involved in looking at the bill. So we actually have active involvement of the National Audit Office in terms of the issues that need to be consulted upon. And obviously making sure the audit trail needs to be very clear about once the money goes into these organisations, how is that money spent, what are the approval mechanisms, is it being spent in the right things, and so on and so forth. And obviously the audit process is part of that. In terms of the mechanics of it, I think I'll get Alison to explain more the mechanics of how we're going to do that.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Absolutely correct. We have an overarching integrated resources advisory group which is looking at all aspects of the finance and accounting procedure related to what we are proposing under these reforms. And there are subgroups within that looking at specific topics such as audit and others. And as has been raised by other members of the committee, we have heard concerns since the bill was published that we needed to be clearer on aspects like audit, which we've taken on board very seriously. The expert groups, including Audit Scotland, have been looking at those questions. We are giving consideration at the moment with our legal colleagues to whether any amendment to the bill may be necessary, and obviously that will come forth in due course if it is decided that that is the best way to achieve clarity. And quite aside from that, there will be very detailed guidance on all of these matters. An early draft of which we are sharing with a very large group of professional stakeholders at the end of this week. So the answers to these things we recognise need to be clear and clearly stated, and we have the work in place to get that in the parliamentary process.
Does the same apply to staffing? Because we've heard in evidence that there are different legal requirements with interaction to staffing and training and the like. How does that work within a body corporate that's made up with two legal entities? That
I'll get Alison to answer some of the detail, but let me just begin with the principles. And the principle is that the body corporate itself will not be employing people. It may, through time, that may change, obviously, but what we envisage to start with anyway is that the people who are working directly for the body corporate would be seconded from, like the chief accounting officer, they would be seconded from the local authority or the health board. And the reason for that is, employment law, as you know, is very complicated and it can be quite an issue. And you then could raise a lot of issues that would then make this whole process unnecessarily complicated. So I think the wisest thing is at this stage is to do what we're doing, which is to work on the basis that people will either work for the local, they'll be technically employees of the local authority or the health board, not of the body corporate.
But this will surely require more work. I mean, if you second someone to the body corporate while keeping them, say, in local authority, on the local authority payroll, who will do their work when they are doing that job? I mean, you understand what I'm driving at. There is a cost involved in this that is not covered in the bill, and there's no additional funding. Well,
I mean, in terms of the joint accounting officer, his or her salary and associated costs obviously will be made out of the integrated budget. It will be jointly paid for effectively by the board and the council. If they decide then to second other staff, obviously they can make their own arrangements. But if, as a result of seconding somebody from the local authority or the health board to the body corporate, they do what they do any time they second anyone, they would then make a necessary arrangements for the job that person was doing in the local authority. If it still needs to be done, for somebody else to do it. I mean, that's normal procedure.
But that surely means additional costs for staffing as part of the backroom staff and takes money away from frontline services.
No, because, I mean, the person, if they're being seconded, they're going to be doing a job that currently is being done by the local authority. It's the same job, that's being done under the aegis of the joint board.
Can I just pursue this, Convener? So an HR officer, for example, working for the local authority is then seconded to the new body. But they would have done work for more than one department when they were part of the local authority. That work surely needs to be covered by somebody else, and that means that there's an additional cost.
I think, to be honest, to start with, those kind of central services will still be provided by the local authority and the health board, because the people working under the aegis of the joint corporate body would still, as I said earlier, be employed respectively by the health board and by the local authority.
Okay, so you could have somebody working side by side. If you take, for example, you know, where you were talking about acute clinicians going out and working in the community. So you could have somebody working in the community beside a social worker, a care worker, and they have different chains of command, they have different lines of management, they have different personnel officers, they've got different pay structures. That would happen.
Well, the chain of command in terms of the job they're doing will be with the body, with the corporate body. Obviously, you know, you've got a wide range of pay structures, pay scales within health boards and local authorities, let alone between them. So that would just continue.
So they would remain employees. So who will the body then employ?
They don't have to
You
employ
don't
anybody.
employ anybody.
They don't have to employ. They're not employing. It's not an employing body at this point. So that the services that are being delivered are still being delivered by people who are employed either by the council or the NHS board. They haven't changed their employers, and there's no requirement to change employers.
So who then gives the direction of what happens?
Well,
I mean,
these
if
people-
you're going to share resources and put a budget together, and then you're going to get people to work across sections, if you have them still in their silos, how does this work? I'm getting more and more confused by your answers.
Why don't you explain?
Legalities.
This is the legalities.
So, imagine you have you have somebody in the local authority who's providing social work services. So they're ultimately responsible. You know, their line management is through the local authority, ultimately to the chief executive. The chief executive directs then that they to follow direction from the chief officer in the chief officer's role as operational director, and they then are required to follow that direction from the from the chief officer of the operational director.
So if they're still paid, take for the local authority, then why does the body corporate need a budget? If all the costs are being undertaken, why do we need audit? If they're only directing how services happen on the ground, why do they need a budget at all?
Well, it's control over the resource.
Directing
So
how
it control over the resource.
Directing how that resource is going to be deployed by the people who are in the local authority and the NHS. So the chief officer has the overall budget, and on the back of the strategic commissioning plan, there will be changes that will be required over a period of time. So the chief officer, on behalf of the joint board, is directing those services to be delivered in the way which complies with the strategic plan. And what John is saying is that this bill enables the chief officer to give directions to the health board and the local authority to ensure that the staff that are employed are actually fulfilling that requirement. So it's all tied up legally.
So sorry.
And I suppose we're getting to the difference between the corporate body model
lead
and
agency.
the lead agency model that they have in your area, Rhoda. I mean, it doesn't require that transfer of employment. It doesn't do that. But I suppose what is the downside of it then in terms of co-location of people? Does it get at the cultural stuff? Will it drive that forward? Will it be able to achieve the results that you have witnessed and testified in Highland?
Well, some folk were at West Lothian yesterday, convener. It's already being done in West Lothian and is working very, very effectively. It's already being done in the lead agency model in the Highlands very, very effectively. And even in areas that haven't had formal partnership agreements in the past, such as in parts of Fife, it's already being done where you've got co-location, for example, in Queen Margaret Hospital in Dunfermline, between social workers and health professionals, all working as one team. It's being done in the
Your
Grampian area.
enthusiasm, you'll be scrapping this legislation any minute. It's all wonderful. Okay. Rhoda, go on.
Sorry, I'm just trying to bottom this out. So if you're looking at shifting the balance of care, take for example, again, acute care and into the community. So the body corporate decides, hang on, we don't need consultant in acute hospital. What we need is 5 more, 10 more care workers, probably for the cost of a consultant. So they have to say to NHS, you need to terminate that contract or not fill that contract as would normally happen. And then they have to go to the council and say, you have to employ me 5 more care workers. Is that the way it would work?
No, explain it.
I don't think we envisage that the directions, and there will be guidance about the directions that need to go to the health board and the local authority from the body corporate. That will be developed in good time as well. I don't think we would envisage that they would be at that level of granularity. I think what we would be expecting to see is an expression in the strategic plan of a shift in investment and activity from one bit of the system to another. But I think the other thing that is important is that the joint board is composed of members of the health board and the local authority. The chief officer has a strategic role in relation to the joint board and an operational role in relation to the health board and the local authority. And the key for all of this is that people are working together and they're planning together across the totality of available resource. But yes, there will need to be discussion about how to deploy resources to best effect. Locally, as there are now, that there are places now who have shifted quite significantly their consultant geriatric input, for example, from hospital to community.
So the body corporate will not have the powers to direct. So they may make up a strategic plan, but actually they've got no way of fulfilling that strategic plan.
Powers to direct delivery on the back of the strategic plan.
Okay, it just seems a bit, because they answer to the chief executives. Surely if they're the accounting officer answers to the chief executives, they say, well, no, we're not going to do this.
No, the chief officer is accountable to the joint board for the functions that are delegated to the joint board to strategically plan delivery of services. And then the chief officer has a day-to-day role. This is built on models that are more or less in place now, not exactly, but are similar. The operational side of it, the day-to-day role within delivery of services, the chief officer has a close relationship with the 2 chief executives. Would you want to add to anything?
No,
there?
I mean, I think the only point to make really is that when you provide a power of, I talked about directing, and I mean directing separately to exercising the power of direction. But when you provide a power of direction, then, I mean, ultimately, that allows you to give a direction to someone, telling them they've got to do the thing. But you know, if you think in terms of the way organisations operate normally, then you don't require to be given a direction, a formal direction in relation to everything you do. Normally, what happens is people are asked to do things, they do it, and then it's only where conflict arises and a requirement actually arises for a formal direction to be given that one's given.
Just one final
Rhoda, I
question.
don't want to...
It just seems to me that you're trying to legislate for goodwill. If the goodwill was there, it would be already happening like Lothian and Island. This is to kind of push people down a street, and you can't, unless you empower somebody to take the lead and go where there is not that consensus on the ground itself. I think you're trying to legislate just for goodwill, and that's not going to...
They are empowered. They are empowered. The corporate body and the chief accounting officer are empowered. Now, obviously, everybody needs to try and work on the basis of goodwill and trying to take people with us. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they have the power to do what's necessary to deliver an integrated service. So if you have a recalcitrant body like a health board or a local authority, then very clearly the powers of direction are there. They're vested in the body corporate. And that's what's been missing and why we've failed in this for so many years.
Annette.
I think, given the timescale, I think maybe some of my questions maybe could get written responses rather than right now. But I want to be a brief comment. Someone has actually said to us, instead of the public bodies bill, maybe public services would be more appropriate, given what we're trying to achieve. I don't know if there's any comment on that. It's just a...
Well, I think I don't see the advantage in changing the title of the bill at this stage, and quite frankly, I think, as I say, what really matters is the substance of the bill rather than the title of the bill. Although I do agree that it's always desirable to have a sexier title if it's at all possible.
I think it was the independent sector that made that comment, actually. Yeah. The other point, I mean, I totally agree with you about the involvement, at particularly at locality level, of the clinical health professionals. I lived through the GP frustration and disillusionment of CHPs at the time. And I just wonder, I think it's crucially important that, say, particularly GPs, but other professionals are involved. And you said they obviously had to be embedded. I just wondered how you're actually going to enthuse them about that.
Well, I mean, basically, I think there is already a lot of enthusiasm out there because people realise that, you know, this is we're serious this time. We're going to do this. It's going to be in law. They won't have an option. So it has to be done. And the CHPs, I think there were two mistakes with the CHPs. One was to make the CHPs a subcommittee of the Health Board. I think my own view is that was a mistake. And the second one is that what we're doing in terms of integration was not a statutory requirement. Integration is only now becoming a statutory requirement. And I think that's why the disillusionment set in. But certainly in talking to the medical professionals, whether it's doctors or nurses, particularly community nurses, they are all absolutely, everyone I've met is utterly signed up for this. And, you know, in guidance, we will make absolutely sure that at the locality level as well as at the partnership level, that all the key people, stakeholders who need to be involved, and I say involved, not just consulted, involved, will be involved.
Again, I'd add to that that the CHPs weren't local enough. They really lost the locality,
That's
if you
right.
like, and I
Absolutely.
think that's terribly, terribly important.
Absolutely.
So, and the substantive thing I was going to say, there's been a lot of concern expressed that there is no complaint system spelt out, and perhaps some detail, not necessarily just now, but on that, because I think the disabled groups yesterday were particularly saying that, and a number of other people have said, given the different routes of complaint, a bit like what Rhoda was speaking about with other issues.
We actually have a stream of work going on exactly on the issue of establishing a complaints procedure that is fit for purpose. Obviously, you do have different complaints procedures within local authorities and within health boards. So we are working on that, and we don't require any change in legislation to do that. We certainly don't anticipate any big change in primary legislation in order to do that, but it's one of the streams of work. I mentioned 8 working parties. We've got a stream of work going on specifically on complaints, and that hopefully will report by the turn of the year, roughly.
Yes, by the end of this year, we'll have a report to the Cabinet Secretary.
As I think probably maybe should be given a written response. One is the options being considered in relation to pension funding, including the costs. Obviously.
Right, again, this is a wee bit of a red herring in the sense that the corporate body won't employ people, and therefore it won't be directly involved in pension issues. There is an issue around if somebody does transfer their employment from a pension fund that there is in deficit, and because through time they may employ people, obviously, and we have to make sure that anyone transferring to the body corporate in future years, if they're transferring with a pension in deficit, then we don't inherit our share of the deficit, you know, because that's historic. So there is a bit of a technical amendment probably required to the bill to deal with that, but beyond that, we don't see a big issue with pensions for the simple reason that the body corporate won't actually employ anybody.
Connection with what's been set out in the financial memorandum.
Yeah.
Paragraph 116,
yeah,
to be exact. And
I think the Finance Committee drew that to your attention,
yes,
but it's well in hand.
Okay. And the other one from the same sort of sources, any additional funding to be provided in the event of an equal pay claim being successful?
No, because it's nothing to do with us. I mean, if there's an equal pay claim in the local authority, whoever's working for the local authority will be part of that settlement. If there's equal pay claims outstanding in the health boards, the same thing will happen. We're not employing anybody, so it's the employer who has to settle with the employee in terms of equal pay.
Okay, thank you. And almost finally, the provision of funding for delivering inspections with Healthcare Improvement Scotland inspections under the integrated model.
Well, very clearly, I mean, at the moment, the Care Inspectorate and Healthcare Improvement Scotland can, with my permission, carry out joint inspections. My view is, and we'll be tabling an amendment, in fact it's already in the bill, I think, to allow them to carry out those joint inspections without always having to come to me for permission. And as you probably heard earlier, the Care Inspectorate and his are working together on the implications of integration for the delivery of inspection services. and they will be coming. In fact, his has got a report being launched fairly soon, a consultation fairly soon, and the implications of integration is one of the subject areas that will be covered in that consultation. But obviously, you know, eventually we need a more integrated inspection regime. The other thing I think is a strategic challenge is, as we drive more and more to have people have their health care and social care much more delivered at home, we need to be satisfied that we have robust systems in place for picking up any problems there might be in relation to abuse, particularly in relation, for example, to dementia patients who perhaps don't have the capability to report any incidents themselves. So that I've charged officials and the agencies to look at that as a strategic issue that we need to address. Clearly we can't put a CCTV camera in everybody's house. And I hope nobody's suggesting we're going to try and do that under the bill. But there is an issue here, and that is about abuse at home. And you've seen south of the border where there have been examples recently where a TV company did install a CCTV camera, and it didn't make for very pleasant viewing in how the older person, who I think had dementia, was being so badly treated. So we need to, I think, develop a more robust systems for ensuring we pick up any abuse of someone being treated at home.
Finally, just we know that most partnerships appear to be going down the body corporate route, apart from Highland. Do you know final figures on that yet?
I mean, there were a couple of areas who I think did explore the lead agency model, but my understanding is, to the best of our knowledge at the moment, and you know, we're in pretty good close touch with all the 32 areas, but our clear impression at the moment is that the only part of Scotland likely to go down the lead agency model is the Highlands.
Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Fiona. I'll try and keep this brief, not least because I've got a meeting to get to at 1 o'clock. We heard this morning the view from the Ombudsman and others around the table that the complaints procedures should be standardised under the new model. We've heard different evidence from NHS Dumfries and Galloway in terms of their view that there's no need to rush towards standardisation, but the Ombudsman's view was NHS Dumfries and Galloway when they give evidence to us. Can I ask what the Scottish Government view is around the complaints procedures and whether you would see merit in some form of standardisation?
I think inevitably there has to be a very clear single complaints procedure made, you know, that people can make complaints against the body corporate or the lead agency. I think there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that people need to be clear about the complaints process, and that's the stream of work that I referred to earlier that's being done. The SPSO is actually, the Ombudsman's actually involved in the group undertaking that work. So that will report by the turn of the year, and obviously at the appropriate time we'll share the outcome of that with the committee before we proceed. We'll obviously consult on the recommendations of that working party before we take matters forward. But my view is, I have to say, I personally believe that the Ombudsman is right in this point about you have to have one very clear complaints procedure for the services covered by the service, but clearly we'll wait and see what the working party says.
There was some concern expressed by the Ombudsman that work around complaints and scrutiny can drag sometimes, and he pointed to the Carrera review commissioned in 2007, I think, where the you know, still not fully implementing some of the recommendations that flowed from that. Would it be your intention to pursue this with some vigour, perhaps, in order to ensure that there wasn't an unacceptable lag between the implementation of the legislation and an implementation of a standardised complaints procedure?
Let me say unequivocally, there'll be no dragging on my watch.
Thank you very much.
Well, I understand you weren't here for the full time of that, but you know, as I said to the Ombudsman today, we made similar recommendations of the complaints, commissioning, developing the new workforce, national care standards in January 2012. Many of these recommendations were accepted by the government. That's 18 months on, so there are significant questions here. Could we clarify that we don't need this legislation to address the national care standards or the integration of care inspector and his. Although, is there a contradiction in that one has got statutory powers and the other hasn't?
No, I think in terms of what we intend to do and our way forward as agreed at the moment, we don't see any need for additional primary legislation beyond what's already in this bill, Convener. I mean, if you look at the complaints procedure, there's already a very substantive body of a legal framework in Scotland for complaints, and really what we're talking more about is the process rather than the statutory basis of the complaints procedure. If there is a requirement to make any legislative changes, for example, on complaints, we believe we have the powers to do that probably under secondary legislation under the Public Service Reform Act, I think is the one that we can do. So we reckon the Public Service Reform Act probably gives us the powers we need to do anything we might want to do under secondary legislation.
There's much, I mean, to support the Ombudsman's claim, there is much that we could have been, and indeed the unanimous recommendations of this committee and accepted by the government. We could have been moving on the national care standards and outcomes and whatever for the last 18 months. What held us back?
Well, I think I don't think we've been held back. I think there are certain things that happen at certain times, and the priority has been to get the principles of the bill agreed. And as I say, there's work been going on. And if you take complaints, for example, we haven't been sitting back doing nothing. We've actually, in the last 18 months, had work going on complaints. We've obviously got to try and take people with us, particularly in this case, COSLA. And we're working with them, and they're heavily involved in the complaints work that will report at the turn of the year.
I'm sorry to press you, Cabinet Secretary, but you said earlier that we don't need this legislation to deal with the complaints, or indeed the national care standards. The national care standards haven't been reviewed it must be nearly 12 years now. Why has that work not been completed in the last 18 months?
Well, first of all, in terms of the complaints, what I'm saying to you is...
It's the national care standards we were talking about, not necessarily
sorry, I thought you were talking about both. Well, with the national care standards, very clearly, we looked at the recommendations of the committee and we accepted in principle they need to be reviewed. But one of the issues around that is whether... well, first of all, we need to obviously consult with the appropriate people before we announce the national review of the national care standards. But also we wanted to be a bit further down the road with this legislation and all the infrastructure around this legislation, so that by the time we reviewed the national care standards, people can do it in the context of knowing the shape of this bill, because clearly that impacts on what people will say about the future of the national care standards. And in particular, I think there's an issue about the interplay in future between clinical standards and the national care standards. So those, this is the appropriate time to review the national care standards now that people know exactly what's happening on integration.
And I think at the parliamentary debate at the beginning of this process, we gave, the Cabinet Secretary gave a commitment to Parliament that we would ensure that the review of the care standards was carried out with our informal process for looking at outcomes. Because the outcomes, the national outcomes that we've put into this consultation and the care standards have to link together. So as we speak, we're going around the country sharing with members of the public, older people's groups and broader groups, this is what we're planning around care standards. What do you think about the future? And here are what we're saying about national. So we've brought the two processes together. So my team and colleagues from the Care Standards Sponsorship Branch in Scottish Government are jointly going out around the country talking to people at the ground level around care standards and national outcomes. And what we wanted to do was avoid totally confusing everybody about what are the care standards and what are these national outcomes. So we're doing joint presentations, joint discussion, joint debate, both with members of the public and with the professionals.
Pleased to hear of it. I must have missed it in Markenstein's. I don't know if anybody else came across it.
Okay. We can give you a list of... Yeah, we started in Shetland, been down in Dumfries and Galloway, we've done Paisley, we've done Dundee, we've done Aberdeen, but we can give the committee information on that.
It'd be nice to hear, and I suppose I make a plea for the committee we've done a lot of work in this area. We have made a number of recommendations. And I think there was an indication that the committee would be kept up with this work, and you know, it would be useful if we are, and I'm glad to hear that we are making progress on in and around the complaints and to make it better. There are a number, and I know the Cabinet Secretary is under pressure, and members are going to a meeting. There are some issues and questions that haven't been covered, and I think some of the financial stuff as well. Would it be okay to write and get
no problem at all.
Responses on the record?
Yeah, and you know, anything at all the committee feels that it needs additional information, convener will supply it, no problem.
Right. Well, I think I thank you for your attendance here this morning, and your colleagues. Thank you all very much. And that we close the meeting.